Okay, welcome to Real Estate Investing. This is a continuation of our financial stewardship course. Most everybody here has gone through the 5 steps to financial freedom and basically creating your own dynasty through financial stewardship and helping others. Tonight, we're going to be focusing in on cash flow assets and making money using real estate. And so this is going to be a pretty exciting night, because we're going to go into a topic that undoubtedly sets some liabilities and more importantly, not just assets and liabilities, but what it means to actually invest for cash flow as opposed to the traditional hand it off to a third party and have them invest your assets. As you know, the numbers on these of doing that is extremely bleak. The average is about 70% of the revenue goes to third parties when you do that. So this is about taking control of your own investing and finding ways to make money for your that benefits you and your family instead of to some third party. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in. My name is Toby Mathis. A lot of you guys know me. A lot of you seen me at Dynasty. Who you haven't seen is Clint Coons, who's joining me tonight. Clint, if you're there, unmute yourself and say hey.
Hey guys. Yeah, typically Toby does not allow me to go out very often, so that's why you haven't seen me.
That's right. Yeah, Clint and I are the two main partners that started Anderson back in the 90s. Clint and I have also been real estate investors together since that time, and we have properties that pretty much all across the country. I don't think we have anything international. If we do, he hasn't told me about it. Right? We invest in everything from commercial properties. We have office building, warehouse space, to residential, including we have condos, one townhouse, and a lot of single-family residences. When I say a lot, we just have lots of little single-family residences rolling around that we use as rentals, and we'll explain all that. Clint, why don't you go into your background, because you obviously have a lot of experience in the real estate realm, having grown up in it, and not too many people have been introduced to you, so you can give a thumbnail sketch of how you got into this business, and I'll fill in some of the blanks.
Sure. I mean, people often ask how I got started in real estate, and I think it was being born into a family where my father was a real estate investor. And he basically looked at having two sons as an opportunity for indentured servants for, I don't know, probably until I graduated law school, because as long as he was paying for my school, he thought that I should go work for him. So I learned quite a bit. I grew up working on my dad's apartment buildings or working on his single-family homes, and I learned quite a bit about real estate investing. In fact, through that process, I developed a number of skills, and there was a time there where I thought I would embark on a career in real estate and I'd become a contractor, and I was a framer while I was in college. And so while I was, studying, going to get my business and administration degree, I was also framing homes. And then there was a downturn in the market, and I remember I was working in a town out here called Kent, and I was fixing some work. It was in November, and it was pouring down rain, which it does in Washington State for probably 10 and a half months out of the year. And I slipped, and I didn't fall off the roof, but I just, threw my bags down, threw the hammer, and said, you know what, I don't need to do this. I'm going to do something else with my life. And it took me down the legal path. But I always retained that interest in real estate, and that really drove me going forwards. When we started Anderson, Toby and I mean, one of the major concerns I had was asset protection, because when I grew up, my grandfather was an attorney, and he never once sat down with his son, my father Craig, and explained to him how he should protect his assets. I mean, my dad had plenty of liability just from his tenants, but then you throw on the liability that came from myself and my brother, what we would be doing on the weekends. I mean, that just increased his overall liability exposure, and he had no asset protection. And so the way my father would settle claims that were brought against him is, just as I stated, settle. Because he realized that if you don't pay to make this go away, your potential risk of loss is much greater if they get a judgment against you. So this inspired me when we started Anderson and talking with Toby to really focus in on individuals who own assets and show them how to protect those from the multitude of creditors that are out there. In fact, this afternoon I was talking to someone in California, and he said to me, he goes, I just don't understand it. And this individual has several properties, probably worth about 30 million when you add up all of his real estate. He said, I don't understand it why people want to take what I've built up. And I said, well, if you think about it, think about human history. That's what it's always been. You always have those who have built something, and you have those who have not built something, but they want to take it from those because they don't want to go through the effort, spend the time, spend the resources, to create this. It's much easier for them if they can to come in and just take it from you and then make it their own. And I said, unfortunately, you live in California, which is one of those states where there are far too many attorneys, and they facilitate this type of wealth transfer. Take it from people who have made something and transfer to those who have not. And if you then look at it from that perspective, I mean, that is within human nature. Now, there's ways to prevent that, and that's something that we at Anderson do, is we create structures to stop people from taking your assets and your hard-earned wealth. And real estate is one of those areas where there's tremendous opportunity. Toby and I have been very successful in our real estate investing, but at the same time, we do appreciate the risk. And so we want to make sure that we minimize that risk to the greatest extent as possible.
Yeah, that's well put, Clint. The three things for us is always preserve, protect, prosper. Tonight, we're going to be focusing an awful lot on prospering in distinguishing the difference between an asset that's going to generate cash for you versus an asset that might, that is actually a disguised liability. And you'll see the difference as we start going through some of the numbers and you start looking critically at properties. Not as much tonight as you will when we meet again next week, and then we're going to skip a week because of the first steps to success, and we'll be meeting the following week where we really start seeing how the numbers play out. Real estate's it's not mystical, it's not magical. It's actually, you can jump on it, set it, spit on it, you can dig on it, it's something that's physically there, and typically what you're looking for is something that somebody else is going to want. And there's different degrees. There's people that want it because it's part of their portfolio. We've worked with investors that, Howard comes to mind, Clint, is who used to buy land out in front of developments knowing that they're going to have to buy big tracts of land, and he'd put himself in the way of it so that they would have to pay him to get access to certain land. I knew a guy that made his living, actually going through law school, he would buy land to sell the easement rights to put electrical lines across them. He'd buy big tracts of land. So there's lots of different ways to make money in real estate as opposed to buying property, hoping that it goes up in value, and then selling it someday. Real estate is one of the few areas where you really do have an awesome opportunity to never pay tax on something and to have it supply you with cash indefinitely. And when I say you, it could be you, your family, your kids, your kids' kids, your kids' kids' kids, or whatever. You could have it benefiting organizations, but if you set it up correctly, it can just sit there and continue to pay out dividends for the rest of your life, and then over a period of time, whatever you set out. And so tonight we're going to be talking about getting involved in that. Kind of the whys, that's going to, for a lot of you guys, I know the why is to create a little bit of extra wiggle room and some cash flow. For other you guys, the whys might be different, but we have a section where we'll go over that. Before we get into that, I'm just going to give you the mechanism that we're going to use tonight, kind of our agenda on what we're going to go over. The first thing that we're going to be going over is something termed the three-legged stool. And the gal that's generally doing these webinars with me is Denise DeVoe. She's horribly ill, so she wasn't able to make it tonight. But this is one of her terms. And we're going to go over what the three-legged stool is and why it's important in real estate. We're going to go over terms that you should know. In other words, in order to be successful in anything, you kind of have to know the language. If you travel to a foreign land, it's going to be very difficult for you to be successful in that foreign land if you don't learn at least the basics of the language. And the same is true in real estate. They have a special language that they use, everything from BPOs to cap rates to all sorts of magic terms that they use, and we're going to go over those terms and make sure that you know what they are and that you get an understanding. Quite often, it means exactly what it says. Someone's just using a kind of a funky way of saying it. Hey, what's a cap rate? Well, it's the capitalization. It's something that gets returned. It's pretty easy once you know it, but people like to shorten it, or BPO broker opinion on a property value. It's like you can sit there and it's just, why don't you just call it what it is? Because they like to use special language to keep the people that don't know the language out. We're also going to be going over the tax aspects of real estate to make sure that you understand that not all assets are created equal when it comes to the tax code, and there are some significant tax benefits to a particular type of real estate ownership that is better than anything else that's out there, period. There's nothing that is better for you than this from a tax standpoint than this. And so we're going to be going into that, and we're going to then finish off talking about wholesaling. And tonight, this is for those of you who don't have funds. You're going to be sitting there saying, hey, I want to be in real estate, but I'm basically starting to put some money aside, or I'm still paying down debt. How do I get involved in real estate? And we're going to show you ways that you can still profit. In fact, out of this community, out of just the Danny's community in this last year, I've seen several people, but two in particular, that are making six figures not owning the real estate, doing nothing but wholesaling. And it's not that difficult to do. It's just once you kind of know that there's some things out there, then it'll kind of change the way you're looking at things. It's not going to be kind of, it's going to. So I want to just throw something out, and that's the why are you here? I want to kind of know the audience. And so I'm going to launch a poll, and all you have to do is say, what's the primary reason you are here? I want to get an idea of why everybody is involved or wants to be involved in real estate. And if we get a better flavor, then we'll be able to serve you better of why you're here. And I also want Clint to say this, because you guys are a different type of group. A lot of times Clint and I are working with guys and gals that have been doing real estate for years, and all they're doing is fine tuning and honing, and they're quite often we'll come across folks like he was just mentioning, the $30 million guy who's just, we're just trying to help them keep it. But a lot of times they don't even know the why. And I think it was Hans that the last dynasty was talking about, the rich, miserable bastard. You can be rich and you can still be miserable if you're not trying to figure out the why and your purpose of doing things. And so I was explaining to Clint, who's known Hans and Danny for we've had them as clients since I think the late 90s, but we oftentimes get together and talk about particular clients, and I work very closely with Hans and Danny. And I say that the group is different, Clint. You're going to see that these people aren't motivated the way that other groups are motivated, and I kind of want them to see this. Clint, can you see the poll results? I'm going to go ahead and close it and launch it here. But
Yeah, I can.
yeah.
And in fact, most of those poll results are aligned with one of the reasons why my father got involved in real estate, and that is to create generational wealth.
Yep. And that's a good one. I mean, that's really it. Hopefully people can see that I don't think there's any, I want to quit my job and do something else. Nope. Just curious. Nope. Desire to help someone else? Nope. I want to create multi-generational wealth, and I want to create another source of income. One of our main prongs, it's actually the seventh prong of financial stewardship, is never relying on one source of income, and this is a great way this is a great way to create another line of income that comes in. I'm getting a lot of questions here. Let me just see if I have any that we want to answer now. Some of these we'll put to a little bit later. Uh, Farmland. I want to know if 100 acres of farmland is better than a house to rent out. So, Clint, I don't know if I've talked to you about this one, but I'll give you, folks, I'll give you guys an example of somebody who was in the same seat 6 months ago, who had gone to the Dynasty, had signed up for financial stewardship, and we did the first set of real estate courses. It was when Denise and I did the first ones. We've only done this one other time. And they were looking at doing rental property, and they had a piece of land that they were going to sell because they had acreage. And on that land was a manufactured home, a double wide, whatever you want to call it. And we did a rent check on it. And the average rent in the area was about $1,000 a month. I think it was 1,100 total. And I said, well, how many acres are you sitting on? They're sitting on 6 acres. How hard is it to subdivide? What do you mean? Well, you're about to sell this acreage to go out and buy rentals, right? I said, yeah. I said, what if you could just put manufactured homes on this acreage and you already own the land? Figure that one out. And they figured out how much they could buy manufactured homes for. It was a song. You'd be surprised at what you can get those things for. And they were able to, I think they put 2 or 3 on there now, but their whole plan was sitting in front of them. They didn't even have to, it's so interesting because I don't even think they had to look for outside money. They ended up having access to capital, which we'll go over a little bit today, that they didn't even realize they had access to, that they were sitting on one of their retirement accounts. And so they immediately started cash flowing these properties. I mean, they already had the property that cash flowed off of one property. And now they're just slapping more homes on the actual land that they already owned. And so when somebody says, hey, what's better, 100 acres or rental property? What's better is having assets that are not liabilities. And an asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out. So I don't care whether you have 100 acres or 0.1 acre. What I care about is how much money is it putting in your pocket. And that's where we get it. That's what we're really going to be focusing on. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Clint, do you have any comments on that one?
Well, I think a lot of times too is that when you're looking at investments, you can lose focus of what the goal is. And as Toby stated, the goal is to put income in your pocket, but people can get overwhelmed by the idea of, hey, I want to own 100 acres because if I can tell people I own 100 acres, that's one of my life's goals, to say that I own all this property. But at the end of the day, you could own 100 acres and not generate any income off of that. Whereas if you own 3 properties and you're generating $30K a year, you're actually building wealth then for yourself and for your family. So you can't let your personal desires override the metrics.
Yep. The rule of financial planning is calculate, calculate, calculate. And the rule of a liability is it takes money out of your account. The rule of an asset is it puts money in. Anything else is something else. It's not either. It's either, if you are investing, and I will go over this because I stole Hans's quadrant on his debt quadrant, so I will go over this. But if you're banking on appreciating assets, somehow bailing you out, you have to understand that an appreciating asset is a boom or bust cycle. Assets become more valuable, but they also devalue just as quickly. They go up and down. Look at the stock market. Somebody's going to say, well, it's at 20,000. Well, they manipulate what's on the Dow. It's not a fair comparison. It's not the same stocks they started with. They swap them out if one's not doing so well. So it's designed to continue to raise. And even so, you have these massive losses. And the easiest way to consider this is if you have $100 and you lose 30%, you now have $70. If you gain 30%, you now have, $91. You're still down. It's not, you want to get away from that cycle. The better way to look at things is whatever it's worth, I don't care, but it makes me $10 a month. I don't care if it's $1 million or $10. It makes me $10 a month. One's a great return, one's a pretty stinky return, but at the end of the day, they both put money in my account that I can go spend and that can do great things for others. I could be giving it away, I could be using it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether it's a huge stock portfolio or real estate. It's got to be putting money in your pocket or it's just a big liability. Um, let's see, I'm going to close this off. Hide. So somebody was just asking me. Nope. So let's go into kind of a little bit of future tripping. The next couple of slides, we're going to be focusing in on not just where you're going to be at, what your future might look like, but we're going to go off of statistics that get us there. The kind of the future wheel. When I first looked at this, I was like, "Oh man, this really stinks." This is actually off of American, where we're at right now, kind of what we're actually having to do. 28% of retirees at 65 rely. That doesn't mean that it's their only source of income, but rely on Social Security in some capacity. 22% still have to work. So even if you take all their benefits and everything else, you're still lumping it in. That's a good chunk of people. That's 50% of the people right there. Of the rest, there are some that have to depend on the assistance of their family. The assistance of the family, we're looking at about 45%. There's 5% of the retirees that are actually, with nothing else, without relying on Social Security. It doesn't mean they didn't earn it, but if you took Social Security out of the equation, they'd be able to handle themselves. About 1% are considered financially independent, meaning it doesn't really matter. They have enough money that they're not going to rely on anybody. Those are scary statistics. And if you're looking to build financial and generational wealth, you want to make sure that you're pushing yourself into that 5%, or at least the 1%. Now, there are tricks you can use. We talk about, life insurance and things like that to dump money into your estate after you pass. You don't have to be super rich. If you plan right, you can still create generational wealth. But it is certainly easier if you can make sure that you are taken care of and that those same assets that took care of you go on to take care of future generations. And the easiest way to think about it is if I'm accumulating assets that kick off money and it's enough money to take care of me, chances are it's going to be enough money to take care of somebody else, or maybe not take care of all their needs, but certainly help them out, maybe help them go through college of your kids and your kids' kids and your kids' kids' kids, that type of thing. In other words, we're not depleting them. They're continuing to grow, and if you teach your kids how to be wise with assets and basically what an asset is, then they won't be in that position where they're on that 95% of the retirees that needs assistance. It's kind of scary. The next areas we look at is where do the top 2% of the wealthiest people in the United States, where do they make their money? We can tell this by just pulling the IRS records and see on their tax returns who's making the most money and where do they make it. And the easiest thing you can do is you can take a look at a Schedule E. If somebody's doing a 1040 with a Schedule E, chances are they either have a business or they have real estate. If they have a Schedule C, that means that they're potentially a small business owner. I don't see too many people with Schedule C that's actually very successful. Somewhere along the line, someone's going to slap them upside the head and say, don't be a sole proprietor, be something else. What you'll see is the vast majority of the wealthiest 2% own real estate. They're either real estate investors or they have substantial real estate holdings. And that's because real estate's one of the few areas where you can get benefits for life, benefits after you've passed, transfer benefits onto other people without paying tax. It's one of the few areas that'll continue to kick you revenue that'll stand up to inflation. And we're not doing the whole gold thing where, hey, gold, it holds up with the rate of inflation. Kind of, but no. Gold doesn't kick you money. Gold is not an asset. Gold is something that you're putting in a silo and you're hoping that it's going to appreciate. But gold also goes up and down. What we're talking about is something that will continue to pay money because people are going to have a place to live. And if I went anywhere in the country and I said, hey, what is the going rate of rent? And I compared it to 50 years ago, I'm going to be way ahead of the game now. The rents continue to increase. Somebody might say, well, what about Detroit? Well, Detroit, yeah, it's still higher. Although many of those areas became kind of war-torn. That would get nixed out just as you're doing your qualification and you see crime rates. But the whole idea is that real estate, with very, very few exceptions, like it's the exception to the hard and fast rule, is going to continue to create wealth just because you own it or control it. In other words, you don't have to do anything. It's a passive asset. If you like, I could own real estate in other areas of the country that I never see, as long as I have somebody manage it for me and rent checks clear and the money goes into the account. I don't really care. I don't have to see it. And this is going to, this kind of plays this out. You really see it. Whereas the other top 25 or percent or so, 26%, about 1% of people win a lottery or inherit it. Same thing in my book. It's very rare, but some people, their families really set them up and they end up with a ton of wealth. That's true generational wealth, or they, get the Powerball, which is, one in God knows how many million. 5% are the top salespeople. What you don't see out there is W-2 wage earner. The one area where that may cross over is the CEO president, but I can tell you, I've worked with many a CEO and president, and they don't make their money on their salary. They make their money on the value of the asset, the stock. Doctors and attorneys, doctors probably more than attorneys now. There's so many attorneys out there. They're generating an extra 40,000 every year, pumping them back out there. But doctors and attorneys, professionals make a good chunk, but that's part of your 2%. I know many attorneys that even in spite of the fact that they have good wages, and I'm going to give you guys a definition of net worth. Their net worth is not very high. The definition I use for net worth is how many days would you be able to exist without working. So if you went on an extended vacation for 6 months, is your financial house completely collapsed, or do you have things in place that will continue to generate income regardless of where you went? So when I see doctors and lawyers, quite often I think they have a lot of money, but their net worth isn't real high. The net worth really comes from that 74%. Those are assets, whether I'm in Tahiti or right now I'm looking out at the beach in San Diego as the sun goes down on the West Coast. I could be here, I could be in Nevada, I could be up in Seattle, I could be wherever. It doesn't matter. The real estate is doing the same thing regardless of where I am because it's completely independent of me. It's a true asset. The asset's doing the work, not me. And that is my experience. And Clint, we work with a lot of different groups and a lot of different people. What would you say, like your experience has been when it comes to the wealthiest, most successful people you've run across, and whether you know anybody that doesn't have substantial real estate holdings?
Well, I mean, we've worked with stock traders and real estate investors, and by far it's the real estate investors who are independently wealthy. I mean, I'll just use my father as an example. He retired at age 50, and right now I think he drives my mom crazy because he doesn't have much to do because he has the freedom that real estate has provided him. I think it's funny that my mom complains a lot about my father because she has to always open up the gate to their driveway because the UPS guy's ringing. Because my dad hangs out on Amazon or he's shopping on eBay now, which is something he never used to do when he had things to occupy his time. But now that he's retired, uh, he still works on his properties when he needs to. But for the most part, as you stated, he's in that 1%. And
Mm-hmm.
this is something, you go back to when I was talking about when I was a kid. I remember when I would ask my dad, are you going to pay us for working? One time he looked at me and goes, this is all going to be yours one day, so think of this as working for yourself because I'm creating generational wealth. I mean, he didn't necessarily say it in those words, but that was the implication.
Came through loud and clear.
Yeah, it did. So now I tell him whenever he's going to buy a new car, I say, hey, you're cutting into my generational wealth here, so let's not buy that car.
Wow. It's interesting. Somebody wrote in while we were doing this and said, hey, interesting, employee is not listed. And Mickey, you're absolutely right. Employee isn't listed as one of those areas, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't be an employee and still find yourself in the 2%. It's going to be the exception to the rule, but remember that an employee that invests in cash flow assets can be still time is on your side. I'm going to draw it right on the screen just to make it your money, the value of money, the time value of money goes like this on a curve. It's always geometrical. The longer you can allow things to hold, the more they're going to be worth. So if money's here and time is down here. So the whole idea is that if you are, systematically putting money, and it could be into any number of items. Real estate is what we're talking about out here, but it could also be something that can't go below zero. So I know Clint and I both have multiple policies, a variable universal life, something also you could also do mutual life, those types of things where you can't go below zero. You always have some sort of gain. Those are the things where if you're just doing them consistently, after a 20, 30-year horizon, you're going to have a substantial chunk of money. So,
Yeah, but how about this, Toby? I mean, as an employee, you're creating wealth for the business owner.
yeah.
So your income stops the day you quit working, and you have no more money coming in. And so as employers ourselves, I mean, we have close to 100 employees. Some of our employees make really good money, but that stops when they quit working for us. And so they're building wealth for the employers, the people who own the business. And so when you think of real estate, I look at it kind of the same way, is that by buying that property, I have tenants who are building wealth for me. And so you want to be in that position, not in the position of being the tenant or being the employee long term,
Yeah.
because that's going to come to an end.
And never, let's see, I think I met W-2 employees are in an entitlement mindset. Yeah, that's there's something to be said for that. Some W-2 employees they feel like they're owed the money, but they never really realize, just as you just said, they don't actually own an asset. They are their own asset, and it's tied to them, and it's entirely dependent on them. You don't want it to be entirely dependent on you because things happen. A, you might want to go on vacation. B, you might get sick. C, you may just not want to work. So you have to switch it over to assets.
A good example of that is I have a friend, he's an attorney, and he is a solo practitioner. And we do vacation together probably once or twice a year. And it's always for only a week at a time because he cannot be away from his office for more than a week because everything is dependent upon him to generate income. Where I have another friend who's an attorney that we can vacation, we used to, for 3 weeks at a time. And he has an entire staff that will do all the work. He has all these employees that work for him. And so that's really the difference. It's trying to shift that mindset. And I've tried to push him down that road to hire an associate. And the pushback is always, well, that's a lot of effort, a lot of time to train them. I said, yeah, but it pays dividends.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sacrifices you have to make up front for long-term benefits.
Yeah, it's called the golden cage. You can build your own golden cage and become a prisoner to it. A lot of entrepreneurs do that. In fact, there's a great book called The E-Myth that some of you guys may or may not have read, but where Gerber goes into kind of this technician mindset and then how what will liberate you in any business or anything you do is to allow it to develop processes to allow yourself to not be essential to the organization. And that way you're working on the business instead of in the business. If you work in the business, something happens to you, the business is gone. You work on the business, it might actually be worth something to a third party. And then that's how you allow yourself to become part of the 2%. But yeah, you guys probably don't need to be told all that again and again and again. You're going to hear it consistently. You're never going to hear Danny say anything differently. You're never going to hear any of us who work with people with substantial assets ever say anything differently. We see it. We do, I think 5,000-6,000 tax returns a year. I can see who makes money. And over the years, we sit there and we look at these and we're saying, where are they making their money? And I can't even tell you how many times we've had groups where they're like, oh, these guys are doing so well. And I pull their returns and I start saying, well, wait a second. They spend an inordinate amount of time and energy to make such a little return. There's nothing, absolutely nothing better than a passive income. An income that does not require you to constantly stoke it, but that the day you walk away, it continues to provide you with cash flow that escalates, not declines, but escalates. In other words, I'm not depleting an asset. The asset continues to pay me, and it'll still follow, still grow, still has the opportunity to grow. And the only thing I know that really hits that is investing in real estate, and you're gonna understand why I'm saying investing as opposed to flipping here in a second. But it's investing. It's things like that. There's very few of them, and I can usually spot it. Clint's the same way. When we look at asset questionnaires, we're sitting down with clients. You can usually tell pretty quick whether you have somebody who gets it or doesn't, because you're going to see their asset mix and where they're spending most of their time and energy putting it. So why real estate? Real estate's one of the few areas where you don't, like, you could do 2 hours a week. You could do 20 hours in 1 week, and you could still get substantial benefit. Because of that, because it's not sitting there on your timeline, and it's not requiring that you spend 8 hours a day, or it's not worth doing, it's a great home-based business. You can do stuff, and for wholesaling, for example, is what we're talking about tonight. You can look around. You can go look around for properties and qualify properties in 15 minutes. You could do it on your phone. You could do it while sitting at a Starbucks. I always throw Starbucks in. Clint, Danny's not a big fan of Starbucks. She gives me a little bit of heat for always coming with a cup. But you could spend whatever amount of time that you need to on this, and it's not a requirement. So it's not like, hey, I have to go to meetings every week and I have to spend at least 5 hours a month. We had one of our executives was very, very prominent and successful in a MLM business. And what he didn't realize is that when he retired out of that business, he basically just started traveling, that there was a new person requirement, and I'm saying this wrong. He had to bring in so many new people or he lost his income stream. And because he was out taking vacations and basically shifting his attention, he did not realize that he was going to lose, and I think it was $30,000 or $40,000 a month, that he lost because he wasn't continuing to put the pedal to the metal and the nose to the grindstone. And then he realized that he would never be in that business again. Someone just said, since we're on the subject of employees, do real estate investors take care of their properties themselves, or do they hire people to manage and/or contractors? I can tell you my experience is that the most successful real estate investors do not do the things themselves. They'll always use professionals, and they'll have it professionally managed because, frankly, they don't want the phone call at midnight to come clean a toilet. We'll keep going into that. The other thing is the income that's generated off of real estate. And we're going to go over this in the terms But the type of income on real estate, invariably, if you're an investor, it's going to be passive, meaning it is not subject to self-employment tax. Uh, it is not subject to old age, death, and survivors, which is 12.4%, and Medicare, which is 2.9%. It is also, if you hold it for over a year, it is subject to long-term capital gains, or you can actually push it off, but we'll get into that when we go into the tax aspect. The big benefit is that you can actually have income that it's generating, and because of the type of asset it is, that next line, that depreciation, will actually offset the income, meaning that you can have cash flow coming in, but you have an imaginary deduction offsetting it. And that deduction is depreciation. We'll go over that in the tax section. The other reason is equity. And equity is how much you own of the property. So let's say that I buy a house for $100,000, but I only put down 10. That's my equity. And it's a $100,000 house, and it goes up 10%. Now it's worth 110. So my equity just doubled. So even though the property went up 10%, I have a $90,000 loan against it, but my equity just went up to $20,000 because the property went up. As equity increases, your ability to get money out of it increases as well. And one of the big benefits of equity is that you can use it, and it doesn't mean that you have to pay tax on it. You can actually use the property as leverage to borrow money without having to pay tax. Now, before you go freak out and say, what that's debt. There's good debt and there's bad debt. The only time your debt is good is when the asset pays for it. And the asset needs to do a little bit more than pay for it. Never would I just have a neutral situation where the asset's paying the debt. It doesn't do me a lot. I'll end up with the equity in the long term as the loan's paid down. But what I want it to do is pay for the debt and then give me some money too. And that's where the appreciation comes in. Over time, the value of real estate historically has increased, consistent with that of the stock market. But just keep in mind that when I buy $5,000 of stock and it goes up 4%, that means I made $200. If I put $5,000 down on a $50,000 property and it goes up 4%, I made $2,000. It's statistically, I get much more bang for my buck if I'm going out and using and leveraging my real estate. And it just means that I can get into a much bigger asset. I can also get in hot water too, but it's like that risk-reward thing. What we know is that if you have cash flow will make a genius out of you even when you make really stupid decisions. If I buy a house and I overpay for it, and Clint and I have been guilty of this. We have a few houses in Vegas that we intended to flip, which means we were going to buy them, fix them up, and sell them, and we still have them. And it's been 8 years, but we look super smart because the value of those houses is tripled, and the cash flow is still very strong. They still bring in a pretty good chunk of change every month. I think that in those cases they're all over $1,000, and just they continue to bring in the capital. So you just allow it to spend some time and continue to appreciate, and after, I'm sure that will look even smarter in 10 more years. And and those are the types of properties that just I don't even look at. They just kick a check. I just make sure the check's clear every month. I have a property manager that watches over, and at the end of the year, Clint and I kind of take a look and say, all right, what are we going to invest it in this year? It's the same thing. You're just sitting there trying to get the cash flow. The three-legged stool. Actually, hey, Clint, do you have anything you want to add on the on real estate?
No.
So let's dive into the three-legged stool. And this, again, I'm borrowing from Denise. The three-legged stool, in a nutshell, means when you get into real estate, you're going to systematically build yourself into where you have investment properties that are cash flow properties. In order to get there, you may have to wholesale first, and you wholesale to flip, and then you flip to do buy and holds. So the three-legged stool is wholesale, flip, buy and hold. And depending on what position you're in, you may have to start with the wholesale. And then you move yourself into the flip, and then you flip until you're single family. Rarely do you have, or not single family, but buy and hold. Rarely do you have somebody that's able to buy and hold engage in wholesaling or flipping except by accident. And if we're using terms that you don't know, good, because you're going to know them before the end of the night, because we're going to go over there. What we have really is you have two broad categories when you're talking about real estate investors. You have active investors, those investors who are sweat of their brow, that they are the business. And those fall into really three categories. A developer, someone who buys land, develops it, meaning they subdivide it, they put in roads, they do whatever, or they're buying a house, tearing it down and putting up a fourplex, or they're buying property and building an apartment. They're doing something with land, and they're putting improvements on that land or improving the land itself so that it has more value to somebody else, and then they make their money in the short term. A developer is not an investor. A developer is the opposite. A developer is looking for the money today for the work they're doing today. Sometimes you'll have a developer who's both. They're developing property, and then their whole idea is that they're going to build up a portfolio of their own. So maybe they're developing land, and the whole idea is that if they build 3, they're keeping 1. But still, the development activity, that's the engine. That's the active business, and that's what they're doing. If they didn't do it, nobody else would. The wholesaler. The wholesaler is somebody who goes out and finds deals for either flippers or for people that buy and hold. So a wholesaler is really somebody that's, and I say somebody, it can be their retirement plan, it could be their business, it could be their entity, but they're the one who's using the eyeballs. They're the one sitting there number crunching the properties to see whether or not something's going to make sense. They're the one that's going around and saying to the real estate investment groups and seeing whether there's something of interest to somebody else. But a wholesaler is basically a finder, and a wholesaler fee is really like a finder's fee. They're the ones that go out and say, hey, Clint, what type of properties do you want? Oh, you want properties with a 13 plus cap rate in a market that has low unemployment, and and the population's not declining in that area. You have more people moving in. Okay, so we have a pretty stable market, and now I'm going to go find properties for Clint, and Clint's going to pay me for it. I'm not a real estate agent. I'm not going to go out and find the necessarily. I'm not going to go out there and put myself on a real estate contract. I'm not going to represent him. I'm just going to find the property, just a finder's fee. Sometimes I'll take the property under contract, and then I'll sell them the rights under the contract, or sometimes I'll do what's called a double close, and we'll go over these in greater detail later, where I'll actually take title of the property briefly and give it to them. I'll close the same day and have all the agreements executed kind of simultaneously. The next active investment, and I should say this is really, you're falling under the category of a dealer, is somebody who is a flipper. And a flipper isn't the TV show, although I used to love watching Flipper. Flipper is someone who buys a property with the intent to resell it. Usually you can watch this stuff on TV now all the time, Usually it's somebody who's buying a house, fixing it up, and then reselling it. So they buy the beat up house, they put new paint on it, they tear out the stuff that's bad, put in new floors, put in some new appliances, dress it up real nice, and then resell it and make these big profits. That's what a flipper does. Flipper needs to buy the property. They need to have the money or the expertise to continue to fix the house up. A lot of people aren't in that position. They might be able to get into the property itself, but then they don't have the necessary money to do a complete remodel, for example. Quite often, people that are doing flips are in the construction industry anyway. They already have their crews set up, and so they're just coming in. You see a lot of amateurs getting involved in flipping, where the contractors kind of see them coming, and then the contractor does a really horrible job and holds them pretty much ransom on the property. So it's always like you got to have a little bit of, you got to know what you're doing before you walk into the property. Or they buy a property that's no matter how you run the numbers, it's just not going to work. They're buying the property for too much. And so a flipper is just someone who buys property with the intent to sell it. Usually they're fixing it up. Not always. Some flippers are buying property that's distressed. And they know they're buying distressed property. They're out of an estate or out of a foreclosure or some other circumstance where they just know they just need to hold it for a little bit and sell it, but they're going to hold it for less than a year. They're buying it just to, just because they know they're going to get some short-term gain out of it. The other type of investor is passive, somebody who buys and holds. They let the real estate itself do the heavy lifting. And what that means is if I buy a house and it's a rental house, the house itself is doing the work. I'm not doing anything. I might have a property manager that just makes sure the toilets work and, that there's no major issues and field calls and negotiate checks or find new tenants, but they're not the one doing anything. The property itself is what's generating the income. That's why it's passive. There's buy and hold residential, single family duplexes up to fourplexes, and then there's buy and hold commercial. And commercial can be you kind of have some categories. You have storage, you have commercial property that's like office use, you have mixed use where maybe it's manufacturing. But what it really boils down to is the same thing as the buy and hold residential, where the property itself is doing the heavy lifting. If I build a building and I have 30 spots in it for people to lease, it's the building itself that they're leasing. They're not. It doesn't matter whether I own it or somebody else owns it. The building itself is the one that's the asset. It's the reason that they're doing it, as opposed to anything I'm particularly doing. Because the asset itself is doing all the work, it's considered passive, meaning I don't have to pay against Social Security or active income. And again, we'll dive into the tax in much greater detail, but it's something that's just the money's going to come out and it's not going to be subject to the self-employment tax or Social Security tax. And there's some other benefits as well to that type of income. One of the best examples is that if I have passive income and I can take my depreciation against it, but it's going to always hit me, and again, it's not going to be subject to the self-employment tax. The easiest example is if I'm renting a property out, the rents are always going to come in, and they're going to be considered portfolio income or passive in nature. Portfolio income is rent, royalties, dividends. These are things that the asset itself is making it. So rents being a big one. The other side is capital gains. If I sell the property and it's an investment property and it was passive, then I get some benefits there, which we'll go over. Kind of the thing we like to do at Anderson with the Anderson system is we always go 5 steps. The first step we always do is a risk assessment, and we break people's assets into 4 quadrants. On your left, on the left side, is the active quadrant. This is where you reside, your family, your personal assets, things like that. and I shouldn't say personal assets, your personal belongings, your residence. A real simple question: is your residence an asset or a liability? Run it through the test. If it's not making you any money, then it's a liability. And typically, they're always, your liability is going to, kind of sit over here in one of these two categories. The active realm is where you're doing business, where it's sweat of your brow. So when we were talking about the different types of income, and I'll go back to the slide again, this is the active side. This is sweat of your brow. So this is the business. So developer, wholesale, flipper. So on our slide here, this is where they would go. Developer, wholesaler, flipper. You're the one who is doing the activity that's going to generate the income. On the flip side, no pun intended, this is passive. And you have two broad categories of passive assets. You have assets in which there is no risk for ownership. So let's just say this is stocks or cash. I'm not going to get sued because I own stock in Microsoft. In other words, Microsoft comes out with a new video game that they say causes people to go insane, and everybody sues Microsoft. I don't have to worry about them taking all my personal assets because of it. It's a no-risk asset. It's not creating risk. On the other side is the risk side, and this is investment for real estate. So it kind of resides down there. So the two areas that we're focusing on in these webinars is this active side, and are there ways to shield the liability? Absolutely. So we have the risk side and we have the active side. The risk, this is a cash flow asset. So if I'm going to put a CFA, whereas the business is not, it's not an asset at all. Business itself, my work itself, I can't be an asset, but I can make money. But I'm not something that I can own. I'm a human being. So you want to make sure that you're cognizant of the fact that the real estate side, where you really want to end up, is over in that lower right-hand quadrant. Speaking of quadrants, then we can dive into, go one more. Where did that go? I want to do one more. I think I managed to kill it. I'm going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to call this consumer debt. I'm going to call this over here, and this is just borrowing it from Hans. I think I have a slide here. I just don't want to go find it right now. Consumer debt, and then we have depreciable assets. Pretend that I can spell. We have cash flow assets, and we have appreciating assets. Consumer debt's the absolute worst kind that you can possibly have, because you don't have an asset, you're consuming something. So consumer debt is consumed. Depreciable assets, well, they get used up. So we don't want those either. So this is debt. This is what we would use debt for. Appreciating assets, remember that we have boom and bust. And so if we're forced to sell an appreciating asset at the bottom of the market because I have bills due or I have something that comes up, I still have to pay the debt. It doesn't follow it. So this can also be very bad. The only type of asset that's good is when the cash flow asset pays for the debt. And so we kind of end up looking at these quadrants, and it takes us into engaging in some. So we have some risk, but the asset itself is making us the money. And is it okay to have debt on it? Absolutely, so long as the cash flow pays for the debt. So if I borrow money on a piece of property that's a rental property, so long as that rental property's rents are paying back any of the loan, and we call that negative, or the net income and the cost of debt service, as long as it's paying for everything that's associated with that property, including the debt, including the interest, everything. And I add it all up at the end of the year and I have more money coming in than it costs, then that's okay. If I'm going negative, then you're asking for trouble. And I have people doing that, and they try to justify it, and I'm going to say, well, I mean, just be prepared. You're going to have a cash call come someday. Maybe you can weather it, but you really don't want that. So if we're looking at the three-legged stool, we have wholesale, we have flipping, and we have buy and hold. That's your three-legged stool. Wholesaling requires no money. Flipping requires some money. And buying and holding requires least money, but can use credit. What we'll see is if you have no money, you're going to wholesale until you can flip a property. You take the money that you make in the flipper and you put it into buy and holds. That's the three-legged stool. Everybody that gets involved in real estate, sometimes they'll get stuck in one of these areas, like somebody who's a flipper. I had a client who did over 500 flips one year. And it was in Las Vegas, and then they changed the laws on foreclosures, and they required a mediation prior, and all of a sudden it dried up for him. So he was sitting there buying, and hey, I'm making money. He was averaging about 15% per flip. It was 90.1 days. I remember the numbers like yesterday. 15% is what his return on his investment over a 90-day period. And then it just stopped because it required him to be flipping. If he had just done buy and holds, he could have bought a fraction of that and the money would still be coming into this day. And he and I had that conversation about 2 years afterwards, and he said, man, what an idiot I was. I took the short-term cash instead of the long-term. It's kind of like the guys that win the lottery and they say, hey, you could get $10,000 per month for life, or you could have $4 million right now. Take the money over life that doesn't go away. See if you can annuitize it. See if you can get it stretched out longer. It's usually going to be in your best interest, but you calculate. All right, jumping in. Terms you need to know. So this is the second part of our agenda. Terms you need to know. Anytime you're talking in real estate, you're going to have to be able to speak to there we go, that's where it's hiding. You're going to have to be able to speak to individuals intelligently about real estate topics. You can't not, or they won't take you serious. So the first term that I want you to know is real property. And hey, Clint, are you out there? Just to make this a little more interesting, I kind of want to just bounce around. I remember this is where we probably spent the most time in the last session was over the terms. And so real estate and real property itself just means the land. You have something that's real property as opposed to personal property, which personal property is for personal use. Can you use a rental property for personal use? Yes, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about personal use property being, doodads, gadgets, computers, things like that. It's personal property. Real property specifically is real estate. Wholesaling. What would you describe as wholesaling?
You asking me?
Yeah.
Well, it's basically where you tie up a property under contract and then you turn around and give someone else the right to close on that property in exchange for a fee. It's similar to a real estate agent. A lot of times people confuse these terms and they think, well, do I not have to be licensed to be a wholesaler because am I not receiving a commission for finding this property. In reality, the difference is that when you enter into a contract to buy a piece of land and you tie it up, is how we refer to it in the industry, that now you have an enforceable right against the seller to purchase that property. Now you hold an intangible, and that intangible has value. So you can freely sell that to another party and receive a fee for the sale of those rights to close under that agreement. It's not a commission. A commission is where your payment is tied to the sale of the property. You are not receiving a commission or any fees resulting from the sale. The person you sell the contract to, they may not go through with the actual purchase because they may find a reason why they want to back out. Well, it doesn't matter. You've already made your money. So wholesalers is a great way to get started, because if you can find deals, and this is a great opportunity for people who are just getting started in real estate and they don't have a lot of capital, but you have time. And many real estate investors like myself and Toby, we don't necessarily have the time because we're running a business. And so we rely on wholesalers to bring us deals. They find the deals, and then through their connections, we're able to acquire those properties. So that's how I would describe wholesaling.
Yeah. Now, the last time I taught this, somebody was like, well, why would anybody pay anybody just to find them a piece of property? All right. I could go onto Craigslist and find a piece of property. What a wholesaler is doing is finding a property that meets my criteria. And so we're going to talk a little bit here about maximum allowable offer or after repair value. Quite often I'm looking for a property that will end up having some immediate equity in it if I do a few things, and is going to bring me a substantial return on my cash investment, on my capital. If I know that I need to find a property that's going to return 10% on my cash, is going to require less than $10,000 out of my pocket, and needs to be in a market that isn't, again, a declining market, that's got really strong employment figures, I can articulate that to somebody else, or somebody could articulate that to you. I could say, here's the criteria. Then you're going to be looking at very special markets. For example, if I say, hey, I want single-family residences that are getting 10%, I just nixed about 90% of the country. Got to understand that you're not going to get that in San Francisco or Los Angeles. You're not going to get that in New York. You're not going to get that in a major metropolitan area. You're not going to get that in Austin. But I am going to get that in other areas. I might, Indianapolis. I might be able to get that in certain areas in North Carolina. I might be able to get that in certain areas of Tennessee. I might be able to get that in Kansas City. I might be able to get that in certain rural ripple markets, which is a market outside of a hot market. There's still areas like in certain areas of Texas where maybe it's not going to be in San Antonio, but for example, Hans and Danny are in Kerrville. Kerrville is a ripple market. It's sitting there poised to get the benefit of the fact that it's around a major metropolitan city that has more jobs than people moving. Like, it has more people moving there than there are houses. So what it's going to do, the increased demand is going to pump up the cost of properties. But do you want to sit there? Do you want to sit there and try to get right in the thick of that one and pay that price, which again could be a boom and bust cycle? Or do you want to sit outside and say, hey, this is going to meet my criteria? Wholesalers are the ones that find the criteria for the investor that they're looking for. I have clients, and Clint and I have clients that are in San Francisco that do a killing, but all they buy is fix and flips. The wholesaler there could just find them something that meets that criteria. All you have to know is what it is. It's a property that's devalued. It has serious deficiencies that they can come in and basically completely gut and redo. And they have all the contractors on their payroll that do that. And they have a highly appreciating market, so they know that time's their friend. The longer they hold it, the more it's going to be worth. It's not always the case. Go back to 2008. the time you held a property, it was not your friend. You were losing value. You had to turn those things quick. So wholesaling is kind of a fancy way of saying a finder. In Las Vegas in 2008 and 2009, there was a lot of people going down to the foreclosure market. We were the foreclosure capital of the world, or at least the country. I'm going to say the world. But the auction is held in a parking lot down off of 4th and Main in the Vegas Legal Times parking lot. And they go out there and the trustees just sell these things. There are guys that would go down there and buy you properties. They knew all the other folks that were bidding, and they kind of had this hint, hint, wink, wink. Hey, I'm not going to bid up your property. Don't bid up mine. If you didn't use one of those guys, they all bid you up, and they would rush you out. And so the going rate to get someone to actually bid your property was about $2,500. That's what they made every time they did a property. They weren't going to be the owner. That was for you. Other people would go down to the auction with their cash, and they would put properties under contract. In Vegas, you actually had to have the money at the end of the day. In some states, it was 48 hours. So they would go put a property under contract, knowing that they had a pool of investors. In fact, we had one client that was really good at this, and they would go put a property under contract, and then they would market it to their investor database that night. And the rule was if you picked a property, wired the funds the next day, they would get it, and he would always make a transactional fee for finding the property. So that's wholesaling. The folks in your community who have made the money, by far and away, the most successful folks started off in the wholesaling market. They went out and looked for deals, and once they realized that they were in kind of a honey hole, or whatever you want to call it, where they got into an area where there was good properties that met a criteria, they had more properties than they could invest in. So one of them, I'll have her on, I think on the third session, we'll talk about what she did, but she found doctors, and she was in Huntington Beach, and a fellow, people in her profession, she was a doctor, who couldn't believe the returns that they could get in this particular community. So she just said, hey, I have a guy who's got a bunch of properties that they're dumping. It was a group of it was a portfolio of investments, and they were going to sell it en masse. And a lot of times they'll peel off and sell 10 properties at a time so as not to dump them all in the marketplace. And she's able to walk up and say, hey, I got them all sold for you. I'll take the next group of 10, or same principle. It might have been 4, it might have been 5, sometimes 8, 10, 20, whatever it was. You're walking in and saying, hey, these basically I'm going to take, knowing that you already have the people that want to invest. So wholesaler in that situation, she was picking up a property just about for every 3 that got sold, but to a friend, she was getting a property. And so sometimes the wholesaling can be, that sounds really great, right? Well, these aren't $200,000 properties. These are $40,000 and $50,000 properties. But the point is that wholesaling doesn't just have to be cash. It could be a piece of the property. In the multifamily arena, when you're doing apartments, quite often you'll have somebody put a deal together. They may get a 4%, something that equates to about 4% of the value of the purchase, or they may get a piece of the deal. Quite often it's just going out and pounding the pavement and finding it. And that's what a wholesaler is. They're not an agent. They're not representing the buyer. They're not representing the seller. But quite often they are working with investors, and they're finding properties that meet their criteria. Next one, escrow. This is actually pretty straightforward. Escrow just means a third party holding the funds, typically under contract. A lot of people don't want to put money down into escrow. They're thinking they're going to lose it. It's under contract. And so it could be, hey, you have so many days to do an inspection. There's wiggle room in almost every contract. The most popular one is to do a neighborhood inspection, which means it's subjective. And so you can negotiate a 7-day, usually 5, but let's just say you need 2 weeks. hey, I want to put down $5,000 in escrow, or $500 in escrow, whatever it is, but I need 10 days before that money goes hard. And what that means is you can still wiggle out of that deal. It's not a hard and fast deal. You still have the right to inspect the area and make sure it's something that you want. And then you just say, you don't have to give them a bunch of reasons. You just say, it doesn't meet my criteria, and I'm out. And you get your money back. So never be afraid of escrow. Escrow can be your friend. Escrow is a fantastic way to tie up a property. Now, if you're a wholesaler, you understand how much time you can give yourself to go find someone to buy a property under those circumstances. In commercial, it's not uncommon to have months before money goes hard, where they're able to do permitting, they're able to make sure that everything's going to be possible. There's possible to tie up properties for a good long time. In residential, it's going to be hard pressed, especially if you're working with realtors. They're going to want you at 5 days tops. They're really going to push you on it because they want it to close too. So, but if you're working with investors or somebody who's dumping a portfolio, things like that, where you're getting away from the agent, maybe you're talking directly to the buyer. Quite often, you can negotiate yourself a nice long escrow period, which ties up the property. It makes it yours, and in that time, you're going to go find someone to actually buy it. Clint, have you dealt with too many of those? I've seen a couple go where we're pushing on the outer limits of the date, but I know I think you've had a couple run-ins on the escrow side. Someone trying to tie up a property.
As far as what aspect, though?
Trying to tie up a property. Quite often you'll see someone put in an offer, and the offer will, like we just did this in Hawaii. We just you just had a set period of time to investigate the area before your escrow money went hard.
Well, yeah, I mean, it goes hard. I mean, typically where I'm most concerned is when you're putting in that offer, how you're doing it. A lot of attorneys don't necessarily understand the ramifications of putting in an offer that the seller has certain rights against you if you fail to perform. And I can think of one individual in particular, a client of mine, that had put in an offer in their own name on 6 properties, and they didn't have the cash to close, so they'd set up financing with some private money to come in for 80%, and then they went out and they found a private lender to gap fund the last 20% for this deal. Let's say the numbers were $400,000. So they were about a week away from closing, and the private money for the 80% was there, ready, willing, and able to fund. But the 20% gap funder couldn't do it because his money was still tied up in a deal in Florida. And this individual hadn't put anything in place with the gap funder to ensure that that money was going to be available. And the gap funder said, I need another 30 days before I'm going to get my money out of the next deal. So they went to the seller and they asked for an extension. They said, can we extend closing another 30 days? Well, the problem is, A, your money's already gone hard, so you already lost your earnest money. But there are other remedies available for the seller, and the seller refused to extend closing. They said, you have to close next week. I am not going to extend closing another month because it just so happens that these 6 properties you've tied up under contract are subject to a short sale that I've already negotiated with my bank. And basically what a short sale is the bank said that we're willing to accept X price on these properties and wipe out whatever else you owe on this mortgage. But in order for us to accept that and not go after the seller for additional financing, you got to close by, let's say, November 10th. Since she could not close by November 10th, the seller threatened suit. And she didn't close, and she did get hit. So whenever you're tying a property up, once the money goes hard, you have a contractual obligation to the seller to close on that property. Yes, you're going to lose your earnest money, but you could also potentially have other damages. And this is why often, we tell our clients, do not put contracts or do not enter into contracts in your own name. use an LLC, something that limits your personal liability exposure to the seller for any additional remedies beyond the money you put into the deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Clint just used a couple terms that we got people asking, like earnest money. Earnest money is just money that you put down that shows that you have an intent to purchase. So, for example, if I walked up to you, and I'm going to respond directly to Amy. Amy, I want to buy your house, and I'm going to put a contract down that says I have a week to go out and investigate your neighborhood, and I have 3 weeks to get financing. I'm going to push on you to say, hey, I want the least amount of money that I want to put down to get you to take my offer. And you might say, hey, I don't want to wait 3 weeks and hope that you get approved, but I will give you a week to check out the neighborhood and make sure that there's nothing that I'm misrepresenting here. But I want a certain amount of money down so that if we get beyond that week, at least I'm walking away with your earnest money. The earnest money then is the money that you put down to make them take you seriously. If somebody ever offered you those and didn't put any earnest money down, then what you really did is took your house off the market for 3 weeks. And no good seller is gonna go down that path. So earnest money gets paid into an escrow account. The escrow account is money paid to a third party, so you no longer have to worry about getting paid. So, for example, if you're the seller and the escrow company collects, let's just say it's $5,000 of earnest money. Once you've met a certain criteria, then you know you're going to get that earnest money if the buyer backs out. So if the buyer in Clint's situation, we say that the money went hard, that means that the earnest money is now forfeited if you don't fulfill the contract, if you don't complete the purchase. So as the buyer, they now had the responsibility to buy those properties, and it wasn't contingent on financing. It was, hey, you have to close on this date. We don't care why you don't. If you don't, then here's our remedy. We keep your money, and usually you're going to have a contract that says the sole remedy is the forfeiture of the earnest money, which means it's basically you're saying, hey, someone can't force you to buy the property. Now, are there situations where somebody does force you to purchase? If you don't have an earnest money agreement, if you don't have money being held, where you already know what the sole remedy is, then yes, they can actually sue you for specific performance and make you buy the house. That's why you put an earnest money provision, in your agreements. If you do not know these terms, that's where a real estate agent becomes invaluable. They owe you the duty to make sure they're looking out for you. Quite often, there's standard real estate forms that have all these things in it. But if this is your first real estate transaction, I would tell you you want to have somebody walk you through it. And I'm not talking about somebody who hasn't done it a few times. Go out and get a real estate agent that works with folks like you. If you're working in the investment realm, find someone who works with investors. And that may mean that you go on to, there's websites out there for real estate investors. Biggerpockets.com is the one that we're most familiar with, where you have thousands of people in the investment community, and you could say, hey, are there any agents out there that really know investments in this particular area? And then you have them work with you. Can you put contingencies all over the place in a contract? Absolutely. You could say, I'm offering to buy, but I need this inspection done. I need this much time to go out and find financing. I need, it's going to be subject to a few other reviews. Maybe in commercial, we oftentimes do an environmental inspection, things like that. Some of these things aren't done overnight, but what it's doing is it's saying, hey, if I decide I want to back out of this deal, I can walk out and it doesn't cost me anything. And that's what you do under contract. So escrow is just a fancy way of saying a third party holding the money so you know you're going to get paid. Earnest money, it's actually, you guys know my background is having taken Latin. Earnest money used to be an earnest penny. If I remember right, it was when you're buying something, you give them something of value so that they know you're to take you serious. And after the deal is consummated, then they use it, you apply it towards payment. If the deal is not consummated, you give them back their penny. But it's kind of like this honorary thing of like, hey, see, you can hold this for me. Uh, or, if you've ever gone into some place and somebody says, hey, I have to run out and grab my wallet. And I say, oh, great, leave your ID. So they're afraid of you dining and dashing. Moving on, closing. So closing is just another fancy way of saying consummating the transaction, finalizing the contract. The contract, because you have money being held by a third party. All documents have to be executed and verified by the closing company before monies are transferred and deeds are transferred. So when you hear the term double closing, it means there's two deals closing. Usually it means that the wholesaler bought a property, they're closing on it, and then they're immediately selling it to another individual. And so you actually have two closes at the same time, and they call that a double closing. What we like to see more often is this under contract, where you are going in and you're getting a property under contract as a wholesaler. Meaning, let's say I see a property and, oh man, this is a good deal. And I know Clint's going to want to buy it. So I put it in my name just because I don't know any better. But I put in there A.T. Mathis and/or Signs. And I get this deal, and then I go to Clint and I say, hey, Clint, you really want this deal? And he says, absolutely. I say, great. I'll sell you the right to this contract for $2,500. I can sell him the right, and then I execute an assignment that says, I'm assigning my right to close underneath this contract to Mr. Coons. And then Clint can close underneath that contract. So if you run across a contract where they won't let you do that, because and/or Signs used to be pretty common nowadays, they don't like you to do that because they know what they're always afraid it's going to be some joker who's just trying to tie up a property. What you're doing is quite often we'll have somebody do this underneath a trust name. And since trust's a little bit different, you can be the trustee of the trust, but you can always have a different beneficiary, and they don't get to see it. So you could put a contract under the name of, let's just say it's the 123 Trust by its trustee, A.T. Mathis. Well, they don't know if I'm the beneficiary or somebody else is, and so I can actually create a contract that way. And I've done this quite literally hundreds, if not thousands of times at this point, where you're actually putting in offers as a trust, and a trust is nothing more than a contract. You guys have done through the stewardship course know that a trust is a fancy way of saying grantor with a trustee and a beneficiary. Trustee is the only one who's listed on title. So I could be A.T. Mathis, trustee of the 123 Trust, go in there, get it under contract. I'm the beneficiary initially. They don't know that. And I just changed it over to Clint. And I could even sign the closing docs, and it's still Clint's the one who has the benefit of the property. And then I could just transfer my name off over to Clint as trustee. There's lots of ways to do it, and it's going to be beyond the scope of what we're doing tonight. But basically all you're doing, the principle that I want you to understand is that you can put a property, and when I say put a property, it means I can put an offer on a property in my name or in the name of an entity like a trust and put it under contract where now I have the right to close on that property. Just doing that, now I have something that can be sold. Clint, do you have anything you want to add under contracts?
Nope. I'm good.
So then jumping over to comps. This is one of the areas where it makes a big difference to have a good realtor in the area in which you are buying the properties. In a comp just simply means properties of similar size, similar nature to the property you're buying and what it closed for. And when I say similar, usually we're saying within 20% of the square footage. If it's a single family residence, make sure that the comps are single family residences. Usually within 1 mile to 2 miles of the property. Same demographic of neighborhood. In other words, you don't want to have a spike in crime and measure your comps against it. You want to make it sure that it's the same hey, this is the employment, this is the same type of neighborhood, that we're not comparing apples to oranges. We want to compare apples to apples. So comp is just a fancy way of saying, hey, what is everybody else paying for property? Some realtors will go off of square footage. They'll go price per square foot. Others, they have enough homes in the area that are of similar nature. They can actually just comp it and say, hey, last week, house across the street, same model, same square footage, same everything, sold for $25,000 more. Boy, this looks like a good deal. But a comp is just a comparable property. And so when you're doing comps, kind of tough to do it on your own. Like, you could go out there and you could go do the research by pulling up the real estate records, and I've done that. I've actually had some folks where I'm on the phone with them and I'm popping open their neighbors and looking for things. Clint, when we bought a couple dozen properties in an area, and the comps, we were looking at things that were, within a quarter mile selling for, more than what we were paying, so we were feeling pretty good about it. And then the rents is another way that sometimes you do it. A lot of folks will use the rule of one, which I'll go over a little bit later, and you can kind of do a reverse valuation that way too. Other people use cap rate. Let me see if I have the cap rate written up there, so we'll go over that one too. But there's lots of different ways to come up with valuation. What people are actually buying for is usually a pretty good indication, but it's not the only one. Next area is a flip. So when you hear somebody say, I'm going to flip this property or flip this house, what do you think it means?
It means they're on TV.
It means they're on TV. Oh, somebody just asked, is the trust document that we were talking about in the Platinum portal? The answer is yes, and there's actually a video on it. It's called a wholesale trust. Is that what you call it, Clint? Wholesale property trust?
Yeah.
So, Mickey, if you go into the wholesale property area, trust, there's actually, you want to watch Clint's video on it because he'll explain exactly how to fill it out. Do you actually go, I didn't look at it, Clint. Did you go through, walking them through, actually filling it out in that video?
I don't recall if I did or not. There is a video on it that's up there, but I don't recall if I went through that aspect of it.
If you're platinum, fill it out and then call us or set up a time and somebody can go through it with you. It always is a good idea to have a set of eyes look at things before you go out and use it the first time, especially. Once you do these things, you'll realize that it's like there's things to be careful about, and quite often we're nervous about the things that we don't need to be careful on. Offers, I can just say that in Vegas, in order to get a house, quite often, it was not uncommon for us to put in 20 offers. It was so crazy if you weren't getting them out of the foreclosure marketplace. If you were trying just to buy the houses and you didn't have somebody that had pocket listings or whatnot, but you're actually fighting with other buyers, we were putting in offers all the time. And I can tell you, I just used a convention of, all right, I'm going to make it in the trust name. The trust name was the property address with the name trust after it by its trustee, A.T. Mathis. So I didn't have to think about it. I just put the offers in. I'll make the documents after they accept or after they come back with a counter. But I never worried about it because there's so many ways to get out of it when you make an offer with contingencies. The easiest one is to put in a neighborhood contingency, so you never have to think twice about it. You can always put in an offer and then solidify things if they accept. And so if you're putting in lots of offers, sometimes that's what you have to do. Don't sweat it. There's always a way out. Just make sure that you have, the first time you do it, just make sure that you have the correct type of offer document that has some wiggle room in it, to where if they accept it and they say, yep, done, deal, and they accept whatever offer you put in, which usually is going to be the MAO, which I'll go over in a little bit. Hey, this is going to be a kind of a lowball offer, and they come back and accept it. All right, you're not toast in case you miss something. Flip. Since we're talking about flip this house and all these things, it means you're on TV, but it also means you buy and sell properties. You're buying property to sell it. Your intent isn't to hold it for 20 years. Your intent is to sell it to somebody else. It is Cheerios on your grocery shelf. You are stocking your shelves with properties with the anticipation someone's going to walk in and buy them, and you make your money on the difference between what you paid for it and what they bought it for, and it is active. It's no different than carrying inventory of any type. And this just means that you're subject to self-employment tax, it's ordinary income, and it's active. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. That can be a good thing. If you flip a house, you make 20 grand. As one of our clients, for those of you, anybody here went to Hawaii with us, there's one couple in there that was like, man, I bought a house and I was gonna keep it, but I gotta just have an offer on it, and we're gonna make $80,000, and I don't want to pay tax. I'm already getting hit hard enough. And we looked at them, ran the numbers, and they'd already been paying themselves, a decent amount of money out of their company as active income on their consulting biz. And all we did is said, hey, because of this is a flip, you haven't funded your retirement plan. If you want to, we can do 2 years, one in December. This was actually in October that we talked to him. Said you could do one in December and another year in January. Your corporate year end isn't until March, but you're able to make contributions for yourself as long as you're keeping the same salary requirement. You guys are both able to make substantial contributions to your 401k, the retirement plan, and we're able to eat away the 80,000. If it had been passive income, they wouldn't have been able to do that. So sometimes flip isn't necessarily bad. Flip and wholesaling falls under the active income. Next term, SFR. So if you see SFR, that just means single family residence. A single family residence is exactly what it is. It's a residence that holds a single family, meaning that it's just a regular old run-of-the-mill piece of property. It's not an apartment complex. It's not duplex where you're going to house 2 families. This is a single family residence, as opposed to the next one, which is multifamily. When you hear people start talking about multifamily, all they're referring to is duplexes, triplexes, fourplex, on up, to where you're going to have multiple units. You're having multiple families that can reside in the structure. So there's really not much more to say on that, other than all you're doing is describing the piece of property, the piece of real estate I'm buying. Is it designed to hold one family or a whole bunch? Anything you want to add, Clint?
Nope, on the same page.
Right. Commercial is where it kind of becomes its own little nuance, and commercial is what we're going to hit on the third section. Commercial is when you are no longer renting to just individuals. Commercial is almost always you end up going into the realm of renting to other businesses, and it's for business use. It's no longer for residential use. So commercial is where you get into a lot of times warehouses, office buildings, strip malls, all those fall under the realm of the commercial. And when you get into commercial, everything switches as far as the types of groups you deal with. Lenders that lend on commercial are almost always different than lenders that lend on single-family residences. If it's the same company, it'll be a different department. But the loans, more costly. An appraisal on a commercial property is about 6 times as much as on a residential. But the good part of commercial is that because of the type of tenants you're dealing with, they don't get divorces and things like that. Usually you have a company. The worst thing you have to worry about is it going out of business. But they're long-term, as opposed to in residential, it's almost always a year. The average in a commercial is probably 5 years. And so you have much less of the turnover that you deal with when you're dealing with single-family residents. Clint, you grew up doing apartments, and I don't know how I would probably call that multifamily, but sometimes depending on how many units you have, sometimes they'll still classify it as a commercial. when you're going in
Well,
for
it's
fun.
classified as commercial to get your loan, but it's termed multifamily as far as investment is concerned.
Yeah. So anything over four, I think you're going to fall into the realm of a commercial loan,
Correct.
which is code for we're going to take it to you a little bit. We're going to rough you up on the rate. So on our commercial loans, I think we're probably right. I think a good deal is 4 to 5%. Is anybody out there owning commercial property that's refied or done anything recently? Um, I think ours has been, since we've dealt with it, it's been probably a year, and I think we were right around the 4.5 mark. Um, they also do these things called, they amortize them over 30 years, but they're due in five, meaning when I buy a residential property, I usually have 30 years, what they call a 30-year AM or a 15-year AM, which means it's paid off over that time. And that's how they calculate your interest and your payment. In commercial, they calculate the payment over 30 years, but you only pay for five, and then you have a balloon, and you have to either refi it again or pay whatever the balance is. And they make you do that, in my experience, about every 5 years. You're not going to get a long-term payment. And when they do that, that just means that you're going to get an extra expense every 5 years. You're probably going to get hit with another appraisal costs or have to dink around with it. And some of the banks that you deal with on commercial, they're going to ask for annual financials. They're going to have kind of this, what you have to be aware of if you're doing commercial at all, is that they'll quite often say that you have to have so much asset available compared to the loan, or that the value of the property has to remain in proportion to a minimum standard, meaning let's say they say this is a 60% loan to value, which means we will loan you $60,000 if the property is worth 100. If the value goes down and your 100,000 drops down to 80,000, they have the right to request more cash from you to bring it back into compliance. So if it's 60%, they may say, hey, the most that we'll loan you is 60% of 80, which is, what is that, 48,000. You need to come up with $12,000 because we already loaned you the 60. You haven't paid that off. Now we need you to come up with more cash. And we saw that happen in 2009, 2010, 2011. I had some local clients here that were really getting in. There was a Bank of Nevada, that was getting squeezed pretty hard by the feds. They were making all their loans in compliance. And they were being forced to go to businesses and basically say, you got to cough up some cash when the business has never been late on, it makes no rational reason as to why they'd be trying to squeeze them out of cash at that time. And a lot of these companies couldn't come up with the cash, so they're getting foreclosed on when they were never late. They were not in any danger of being late, but they couldn't come up with an extra $50,000 or $100,000 or whatever it was to bring the loan back into proportion. And we don't know what the real value of the property was because it wasn't being sold. But they did create a lot of messes for some people. Just know that that commercial realm is different animal completely. And when we get into it, we'll discuss it. There's some great things about commercial, but if you're not prepared and you're not experienced, I wouldn't touch it. The next one is ARV, which stands for after repair value. So if you're dealing with people that use ARV, it means you're flipping houses or you're wholesaling houses. It means you care about what the value of that house is after you fix it up. Clint, did you ever deal with ARV when you were growing up with your dad?
No, because everything was buy and hold.
Yeah. You only really get into this realm when you're dealing with folks that flip. And so when I dealt with my clients that were doing a lot of the flips, and when we were flipping, we'd always look and say, what's the value of the property after we fix it up? And the reason this is important is because eventually we'll go over the calculation for MAO. which is the maximum allowable offer. This after repair value. So let's see, cash out refinance. Somebody says ARV can be used for the buyer's repair, rent, cash out, refinance. So they're looking at refinance. Yeah, absolutely. Your after repair value, if you're fixing up a property that you're doing a buy and hold on, then they'll oftentimes, when you're doing financing on it, quite often they'll be allocating the loan on the after repair value. This is common in construction loans too. If I buy land and I'm getting a loan to do a construction loan on it, they don't care what the land is worth right now. What they care about is the land plus the improvements and what it's all going to be worth when you're said and done.
One other thing is too is many times that where the ARV comes in on a buy and hold is if you're using hard money to acquire the property and do the rehab work. What you'll do is you'll get a loan at, let's say, 10%. You'll bring that money in, you'll rehab the property, and then the ARV value then, after everything's done, has created for you 20 or 30% equity in the property. So then you use that equity that you now have in the property to go to a traditional lender and say, I'd like to refinance out this hard money loan. I have 30% equity in my property, therefore I shouldn't have to bring any cash to the table. Will you loan against this and take out the first position that has 20 that I'm paying 10% on in exchange for a 4.5% loan? And so yeah, Mickey's right there that sometimes that could be used in that situation. In fact, Toby, you and I have done that in Tennessee, so utilize that technique.
Right. So here's how this works in kind of in a reverse. I put 70 versus 60. If you're flipping a property, then it's common to use 70. If you're wholesaling it to somebody else and you use 60, here's how it works. So if there's a property, let's say that I can buy it for, I'm not going to use my saying. I'm just going to pick numbers out of the air. So I have a property and they're offering to sell it it's listed for $90,000. I believe that if I put $30,000 into it after looking at it, I'm like, oh man, I bring my contractor, or you are a contractor and you're good at this sort of stuff. And I say if I put $30,000 in it, it's going to be worth $200,000. $200,000 is equal to the after repair value. My maximum allowable offer, you use a factor of 70% on the after repair value, so 140, minus your repair. And so I should be looking at a maximum allowable offer of $110,000 in order to make this thing work. If I'm going to do wholesaling, then it's going to be 120 minus the 30, which means I'm at 90. So if I'm going to wholesale that, then this is how I just run these numbers. I take a look at, and it may be that there's a certain area in my town where all the houses are kind of like, hey, the roofs need to replace, they need new carpet, they need new appliances and stuff, and I get a kind of a rule of thumb, and I can look at it and I can run the numbers pretty quickly. If they're offering to sell this then at 150, now I know what my price that I can sell it for, what I can offer. And I can put 30 in and it's worth 200,000. There's people that would be tempted to do that. If I took this exact scenario and they said, hey, it's a $200,000 house, all I have to do is put $30,000 in it. There's people that would do that deal, and they would get hurt more often than not, because there's little expenses that you never think about when you're selling real estate. If you have an agent, for example, figure 6% right off the top plus the transactional cost, you're looking at about 10%. I'm lucky to get $180,000 back in my pocket. So ARV and MAO is a fancy, quick way of figuring out whether something's worthwhile. Like I could tell pretty quickly if I have a property somewhere in between these numbers, but I get an idea of what the area is. And again, you can switch these numbers out of what I should be, what I can pay for it. So if I see 150 and I'm the one doing the flip, I could say, hey, I'm going to come there and offer them 100,000. I don't know. What's the worst that they could do? No. Or counter at 150 if they're really mad at you, or just ignore you. Um, but you can make offers. Again, we make tons of offers. You just run it through and you calculate, and then when somebody says yes, I'd be much better off having one of these accepted at 90,000, where I can make a good chunk of change, than having 10 accepted at 150. I'm going to be far better off, and I'm going to have wiggle room so I don't make huge mistakes. So that's kind of rules of thumb. If you see that and you're doing ARV and MAO, then you're dealing with people that's what they're doing. They're probably doing flips, or they're looking at fixing up houses. And so if you know that terminology, then they're going to take you far more serious, and you'll be able to communicate with them. Next one, hard money. Hard money is a fancy way of saying alternative financing, or when you can't get traditional loans from banks, a hard money lender is someone who will give you a loan when others won't. I got acquainted with hard money in Washington State. They were doing gaming tables, where they allowed restaurants to start putting in gaming tables, and it had to be by an approved lender. And so I worked with one of the approved lenders, and they would call it hard money. It was 16 points, I'm not kidding you, 16 points and 12% interest. All their money was on the front end, because a lot of these restaurants, they had access to other capital. It's just not approved lenders. In other words, they were getting money from all their, quite often, I don't want to sound horrible, but like the Great Wall was, I shouldn't say all the different names, but it was a restaurant, Chinese restaurant, and the concern was, that they're just getting money from overseas, that, the wrong type of money, if you know what I mean, that for gaming. So they wanted to make sure that the type of lenders that were dealing, and what they invariably did is made a very small universe of lenders who could charge exorbitant fees to commercial folks. You could never do that to individuals, because you have Consumer Protection Act, and you have usury rates and things like that. But in this particular realm, in the commercial realm, you can kind of go crazy, and you can jack it up a little bit. And points just means upfront interest rate. So like on these deals, they were making a ton of money. Hold on for a second. What is a typical rate today? Jerry, on hard money, it really depends on your relationship with the lender. Usually it's 4 points and about 12 to 13%. Because I'm not going to a traditional lender, what a hard money lender would be more apt to do is do this little after repair value, and they're giving you the 30,000. And so they know you're going to make a good chunk of change. They're going to charge you $1,200 plus. You're going to be using that money, let's just say, for, on average, 3 to 4 months. So let me see if I can do the math in my head. If we're talking another $1,200, so they're probably going to make about $2,400 on that loan to you for giving you the 30,000. And you're going to say, I don't really care. I'm going to refi it, and I'm going to use the after repair value to get my traditional financing. Nobody's going to loan me the money when I buy the property for 90,000, and it's worth diddly squat right now because it's all beat up. But once I dump money into it and fix it up, now it's worth a lot. Now, if I wanted to keep that as a rental, could I? Yeah. It just depends on what you're doing. I wish that we had kept all of our properties. I don't think there's a flip out there other than, sometimes you flip because you want to get away from a property manager, or you're leaving a particular area of the country where you just don't want to be investing any longer. But I can't think of one in Vegas, at least. I wish we just kind of kept them all. Next one, net operating income. The net operating income is basically a fancy way of saying your profit off of a piece of property. So when you hear somebody start talking about the net operating income, On a rental property, you're taking the rental property, the cost of the manager, the cost of repairs, the cost of taxes, the cost of any utilities that you're having to pay, any costs involved in that property other than completely improving the value. So like a net operating income would never include $30,000 of rehab. Net operating income is going to include what it costs you to actually rent the property. So if I'm bringing in $500 a month in rent, then I'm going to take off things like, hey, the property manager fee, transaction costs, banking fees, insurance. I'm going to take off costs for doing some repairs, whatever that is. I may have what's called a capital reserve rate, where I'm putting, a lot of folks will just put 10% aside into an account in case they have unexpected expenses pop up. They call it CapEx. But that'll give you your net operating income when you're all said and done. What you do if you want to know your cap rate is you take your net operating income and you divide it by the market value, and that'll give you a cap rate. So if I have, let's see, what's a good one? If I have a net operating income of $5,000 and a market value of $50,000, then I should be at a 10 cap rate. And what that's going to tell you pretty quick is, what if that market value is really high? Then what happens to my cap rate? It shrinks. So the higher the cap rate means actually the stronger market you're in. And if you're getting cap rates that are double digit, it means chances are you're in a marketplace where the houses aren't selling for a ton, but that's why you have a high cap rate. It's because you're able to get a better return. So it immediately takes you out of a lot of the metropolitan marketplaces. So a cap rate's really interesting because you can go into areas of the country and they will actually monitor the cap rate on what the house or what the property cap rate's on. In commercial, it's really common. In residential, some people use this, but let's say that I'm in an area where the cap rate is 6%. It's a pretty good area. I can actually figure out what the fair market value of my property would be just by knowing what that area's cap rate is and what my net operating income is. And I can get that stuff pretty easily. In fact, if I'm looking at property that's being sold, that's been rental property or as part of a portfolio, I can get that number extremely simply and do my calculation almost in my head. If I know, hey, I'm in an area of the country where the average rent is about $600 or $700, then I can get pretty darn close to what the market value of that property is just by knowing, hey, I have a 7 cap rate and net operating income, let's say it's 6,000, something like that. I can start doing the math and figure out what do I need to pay on the market value. Another one people use is the rule of one. This was popular. I think it was Rich Dad that was kind of talking about it, and a lot of people were using it as a rule of thumb, where if I bought a $100,000 house, I need to be making $1,000 a month in rent. So it's 1% of the fair market value is what your rental should be, or they wouldn't touch it. And the reason that you use that type of general rule is because it's weeding out all of the stuff you don't need to be looking at. It's kind of like nowadays, you can go do a real estate search and you could say, hey, I only want to look at 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and this many square feet and these features. You can filter your results very quickly. Real estate, you can do all sorts of fun stuff like that. But the rule of one is real simple because I can do a filter very quickly. If I have a house that's $2,000 and it's making $1,000 a month in rent, I'm not, okay, bye, next. Not even going to come close. I'd better be investing in that marketplace for some other reason other than cash flow, because chances are that will never cash flow. Because what you do is you take your net operating income and then you add in your cost of your debt. So my principal and interest payments, and that'll get you to your cash flow. If my net operating income is really is decent, then now I have the opportunity possibly to use a little bit of debt. And so then I'll add that back into it. But the rule of one is a very simple way. When I look at these two things in together, rule of one is a fancy way, or not a fancy way, it's a very simple way of nixing. Quite literally, I could look at a screenshot of 100 properties and narrow it down to 2 or 3 very quickly. And it saves me a lot of time. And if I'm a wholesaler, it saves me a ton of time scouting through a lot of properties that somebody may be like, hey, I want to be in this community. Hey, could you find me some properties down here? If you're a real estate agent, this is another thing. I have one client that we've been working with, got into real estate and realized pretty quickly that the name of the game isn't necessarily to go out there and put your name on the side of cars and in supermarkets or do a whole bunch of advertising. You could make what those guys are making simply by finding one investor that buys a lot of properties. And I've known a number of real estate. I can think of 2 people here in Vegas that are, basically that's all they do. They represent, one is in a group of investors, and the other one, both of them are in a group of investors. One's foreign investors and one of it's local. That's the realtor for them. Do they do other stuff on the side? Yes, but they don't really have to. They have a captive group that says, hey, you're the person because you understand what we're talking about when we talk these things. Once you know their language, then they kind of let you in the inner circle. Capital gains. You cannot be, and by the way, Clint, is there anything you want to throw in there on the cap or rule of one?
No, you got it.
So, capital gains. Capital gains, fancy way of saying the rate that is applied on the sale of capital assets. Capital assets different than personal property. Capital asset is going to be real estate. For all we're going to care about right now is real estate. Capital gains come in 2 flavors. Short term, which is less than a year, or long term, which is more than a year. They're different rates. If it's short term, it's your ordinary rate. If it's long term, then it's going to start at 15, and if you're in the highest tax bracket, I think it goes up to 20%. What we care about capital gains is that it's possible to defer them indefinitely and eliminate them completely. And I'll explain what that means when we go over the tax section. But capital gains is just a fancy way of saying the income off of the sale of capital assets. Now, if you are a wholesaler, are you selling capital assets anymore? Or if you are a flipper, then they no longer look at you as owning real estate as a capital asset. Now they consider you owning inventory. And if it's inventory, then it's no different than Radio Shack, or if they're still in business, I think they are. Radio Shack, where they're buying transistors and selling transistors. You're just buying inventory and you're selling it, in which case you get that wonderful ordinary income. If you're selling an asset in less than a year, they still treat it as a capital asset. It's still passive, but now they're looking at you a little differently. And they're saying, as an investor, we're still going to tax it down to your ordinary income tax bracket. It's just it's no longer active. It's not subject to self-employment tax. So if you accidentally sell a property in month 9, then you're just going to pay it at your ordinary tax bracket. You're not going to have to pay old age, death, and survivors, assuming it's an isolated incident. If you are selling that same property, but you do that consistently, that's what they can see you doing, then they're going to treat it as active income and assess the ordinary, or the Social Security as well. Basis. This is one of those items that you really need to know from a tax standpoint. In fact, you're required to know it. The basis is what you paid for the property. An adjusted basis is also a term you'll hear, and that just means that if you improved the property, didn't repair it, but you improved its values, like you put a new roof on, or you rebuilt a big section on it, that's going to increase your basis. On the same token, if you depreciate the property, and I'll go over depreciation here in a little bit, if you depreciate the property, it means that you take the improvement on the real estate. So the structure itself, you can depreciate it because at some point you're going to have to replace it. And what the depreciation is a fancy way of saying writing off a portion of it over a period of time. In commercial real estate, it's 39 years, and residential, it's 27 years. So if easiest way to think about this is if I buy a piece of land for $100,000 and put a $100,000 structure on it, I can write off the $100,000 structure over 27 years. This means I would take 1/27th of it and take it over time. And then we try to get our basis down as close to zero over time as possible. There's something called a step up, and this is a magic word. A step up in basis means the basis gets adjusted upward. So this is, if I say what I paid for lack of a better word, what I paid for, and let's say I want to figure out what tax I owe on a transaction. If I sell the piece of property, the taxable amount, without getting into depreciation or anything else, let's say that I paid $100,000 for it and I sold it for $150,000. My gain is $50,000. I'm not getting into depreciation, recapture, and all that stuff. Just think of it this way. The difference between what I sell it and my basis is my gain. If my basis steps up to the fair market value and then I sell it, my gain is zero. When you pass away, or if you're married in a community property estate, if your spouse passes away, your basis gets stepped up to the full fair market value on passing. In other words, if I bought a piece of property for $100,000 and 20 years later it's worth $1 million, and I depreciated the structure on it and did all that, and my basis, let's just say my basis is zero, and I pass away, my basis is now $1 million. If my heirs sell that property the day after I pass away, the amount of tax they pay is zero. That's why real estate is such an effective tool for the wealthy. They know that all they have to do eventually is pass away and they can avoid gain. The other way they avoid gain is something called a 1031 exchange. What a 1031 exchange is it's called a like-kind exchange. It's selling one asset and buying the same type of asset. In real estate, I can sell real estate, and as long as I buy more real estate, I pay no gain. I pay no tax. So a 1031 exchange is a very effective way to allow you to continue to grow your real estate. Even if you sell some of it, you can avoid paying tax on it by simply buying more real estate. The last term for you to know, and I know we went through a lot, but we record these so you can always go back in and watch it again, is gap funding. Clint mentioned it, and he used it he used gap funding when he was talking about escrow and closing, about how he had 80% hard money and then 20% gap funding. A gap funder is just someone who fills in the gaps with money. It's usually a private lender. And the reason it has its own special term is because it's rare that you're going to be able to secure yourself adequately when you're a gap funder. It's a little more risky, which means you should be getting a higher reward. You should be getting a higher interest rate. Generally speaking, gap funders is someone who knows you, is someone who's either somebody who's savvy in real estate investing, and they're not just a traditional hard money lender, but they're just trying to put their money and get a higher rate of return than is available in the rest of the market. And because they know you, they get an idea of what you're doing. They know, hey, you're buying the property at 90,000, you're putting 30 into it, and it's going to be worth 200. They feel pretty comfortable giving you a piece of, maybe they're filling in $10,000 of gap funding. Heck, maybe they're providing you with 30,000 and you had hard money for the 90. You may be able to come out of that deal with no money down and still make close to 70, 80 grand. So that's what gap funders do, is they're putting themselves at a little more risk. But they're filling in the gaps of where you're not able to get a particular type of financing. All right, so that is the terms. Clint, do you have any questions, or do you want to throw anything in there? Or do you want me I can just go right into the next section.
I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay, so now let's dive in. We're going to talk about the tax aspects of real estate. Tax aspects are important because you want to see what's like the reason that the wealthiest folks gravitate to a particular type of real estate. The reason they're going into the buy and hold isn't by accident. It's because there's incentives for doing so. So again, the realm that we're looking at is, this is active business, this is wholesale and flips. Buy and hold, oops. Buy and hold is over here in the risk quadrant. But we know that we can monitor our risk. We can put boxes around our risk. You guys know that from the previous webinars. When you're in this realm, right here, we're going to be talking about investment. An investment is only taxable when sold. One of the major benefits of owning any investment, and this could be for stock market or anything else, it's only taxable to you when you sell it. If you're just holding it, I could buy a piece of property. I could buy, let's just go back in time when I buy Coca-Cola shares back when they first came out. And one day I find out that I had 10 certificates underneath my bed and I forgot about it, and it split a whole bunch of times, and now it's worth, $500,000. That's not taxable. It's only taxable if I sell them. You just learn that basis steps up when somebody dies. If I never sell it, and all I do is hold on to it and keep it, and then I die, then there's no capital gains for my heirs. That's why the rich use these tools. An investment is only taxable when sold. The reason this is so important is for this next section. You can use it for non-taxable loans. So if those same shares, and I'm going to switch it to real estate. Let's say I bought real estate, and I'll give you a real life example. One of our employees owned real estate in Long Beach, California. His house he sold for $17,000. That piece of property is now worth $1 million plus. He just drove by it about a month ago and he was laughing about it. He's like, man, knowing what I know now, if only I'd known it then. He owned his house, his first house that he owned, was $17,000. If he had kept and held on to that $17,000 house and just rented it out, he could actually borrow against it. What if he had borrowed $500,000? How much tax would he owe? 0. The reason you hear us talk about cash life insurance is for this very reason. It's never taxable, and I can borrow it tax-free, and it doesn't affect my income. It's not part of my income. Same thing I do here. When I have investments, don't have to pay tax if I borrow against it. Other things I can do. If I improve it, like I buy a piece of land and put a structure on it, I can depreciate those improvements. I can actually take a tax deduction. Again, in residential, it starts off as 1/27th. In commercial, there's something called accelerated depreciation too. There's things that are less than 39 years or 27 years. I'm not going to get into all that now, but you can depreciate the improvements. The next area is installment sales. With an investment, I can sell it and I don't recognize income on it until I receive it. So if I have a house that I paid $10,000 for and I sell it 20 years later to somebody for $500,000, you would say, Toby, you have $490,000 of gain. I have, let's just say I never depreciate anything. I would take the $10,000 off. I would owe $490,000 of gain. What if I'm getting that payment stream over 20 years? Then I would just be on an annual basis, I would get 1/20th of that 490,000. Now it's not quite that clean because they're going to impute some interest on it or whatnot, but let's just say for sake of argument, I'm going to end up getting about $10,000 a year of income that I'm having to recognize as gain. Or is that right? Think about this real quick. Oh, 25,000. So I'm getting close to $25,000 a year. That's how that works. So I can spread it out. The reason this is important is for some of you who have businesses or real estate that's highly appreciated and you don't want to pass it on to your kids, or you need to sell it, like you have an opportunity to sell it, but you don't want to get hit with the tax. It is possible to sell that on an installment sale. As long as it's ahead of before you go market it and try to sell it. So let's say you have a piece of real estate and you sell it to somebody else on an installment sale, and then they go and sell it. You still are recognizing your income over time. You could still set it up to do that. Are there ways to do that with related parties? Yeah, there are. Just know that generally speaking, if you're doing an installment sale, chances are you're selling it to somebody else. You're just recognizing the income over time, and you're still secured. In other words, are you worried, hey, but what if I don't get paid? In all real estate, there's something called a mortgage. And all that means is I am using the piece of real estate as security to make sure that that mortgage is paid. So if I sell something to somebody else and I'm getting payment over time, I can still file a mortgage against that just lets the world know that I'm the one who gets paid. So if they try to sell it, they're they'll pay you back. Now you may not want that. So there's ways, again, where there's a will, there's a way. There's ways to avoid having all that due at that point as well, through the use of kind of a creative structure. But the point is that you can set up installment sales where you're recognizing income over time. Especially this is effective if you're selling it to related parties. All right, deferred gain. We talked a little bit about the 1031 exchange. We can keep from having to pay gain at all if we just buy more property. A 1031 exchange can be real estate. It can actually be business property too. It cannot be stock, unfortunately, but it can be things like inventory. But for real estate, it's just real estate. It could be land, it could be condos, it could be single-family residences, it could be apartments. And so, for example, if I buy 10 single-family residences over the years and I decide I don't want to have 10 anymore, I could sell them all and buy a single apartment building and not pay any gain, as long as I use those funds to buy the other piece of real estate. On the flip side, let's say I have a bunch of apartments and I say, yeah, I don't want any apartments anymore. I want to buy land. Okay, sell it and buy land. Last thing to go over is the step up in basis. Step up in basis is when we were talking about under the terms, if somebody passes, the fair market value becomes the basis. So I'm just going to say the basis upon death. It steps up. So again, let's use the same example. I buy a house for $10,000 and I die and it's worth $500,000 the date of passing. The new basis is $500,000. My heirs, again, could sell that property for $500,000, not even worried about installment sales or anything like that. It's the basis upon death, so it's the fair market value equals the basis upon death. So my new basis is $500,000. So this is why people buy investment real estate. Is, just again, think about it from the terms of somebody who's a high net worth individual. They don't need the money, but they're going to continue to accumulate assets. So they continue to buy more real estate. If they're going to sell it, they're going to buy more real estate. Usually cash flow real estate is continuing to dump down money to them. They're continuing to depreciate whatever the improvements are. And then when they pass away, the basis steps up to whatever the value is of all those assets. So their heirs are never going to pay tax on it. It's, that's the way the code's written, but that's where it drives us. Dealer. One of the reasons why we keep bringing up the active income, this is a dealer, is a wholesaler, a flipper. It's active income, which means it gets Social Security. There are no capital gains, so you are paying it at your bracket. It is treated as inventory. And then here's the two big ones. There's no installment sales, and there's no deferred gains. There's no way to avoid the 1031 exchange. In English, what this means, I'll give you an example. So I had clients who went up to Utah. I say up because they were from California and they went up. Bought a $4 million tract of land, and they start developing it. And somebody comes in, this is before 2008, I think this was 2006. And somebody comes up and says, hey, we want to buy your property, we will pay you $7 million. And they're like, well, we weren't really going to sell it, but they said, hey, for that type of increase in value, we'll go ahead and do it, and we'll use our money for something else. And they asked for terms. They said, we'd like to do an installment sale. And they said, okay, we'll do $7 million on an installment sale. I don't think they put much money down at all. And they went about their merry way. In 2008, the market crashes. 2009, they realize they're never going to get paid, and they start trying to collect the debt. Now, the interesting thing was their accountant, this was not our client at the time, they came to me after, just to give you an idea, their accountant had gone ahead and tried to sell this thing as an installment sale, but it was developed property. It was dealer property. This was not capital gains. This was not something where you could do an installment sale. They owed gain on the $3 million the day that it sold, regardless of whether they got paid. The tax hit on that was over $700,000 plus penalties plus interest. They never received enough money to even pay the tax bill on it. And what they had to do was eventually go and show that the debt was non-collectible, and then they could write it off. But the time that they were able to write it off was 3 years later. And then when they wrote it off, they still owed tax, penalties, and interest on the original tax bill. Then they were able to take a loss in the year in which they had the loss, and it offset their income. Not at the highest brackets or anything, it wiped out a lot of their income. But because the tax that was assessed was at their highest brackets on up, the difference was still six figures of what they ended up owing on that deal. Even though they lost their shorts, they still owed tax. That's how dealer property works. If you're not careful, you just treat it like you're making W-2 wages and you'll be fine. How how to wholesale. And Clint, was there anything you wanted to throw into that one?
Nope.
So this last section is what is wholesaling and how to actually do it. So wholesaling is really just identifying the property, find a bargain property. You go out there, you kind of get an idea of what to look for by talking to people who buy properties. Where are you going to find these people? Realistically, it's you go into investment groups and you've talked to people who are investors in property. You're usually looking for someone who's going to buy it and hold it for cash flow. And maybe you're not in a position to buy and hold for cash flow. So all you're going to do is you're going to locate properties for them, or you're going to find the property for someone who flips properties for a living. And so maybe it's that contractor down the road who says, hey, just bring me deals. And you say, great. And they say, a lot of times they'll say, I'll put you in for it. You just say, hey, just find me a finder's fee. And then negotiate the finder's fee. Generally speaking, you're looking at about $2,500.
Or I'd say, Toby, look in your local RIAs or just within the community, the people who are on this webinar. I mean, there are people out there that have money that want to own real estate, and they could be a great source for you to pick up these properties. So if you have the time and you can get out there and find the properties, you'll always find people with money that don't have the time to find the properties themselves.
Yeah, and I think well said. And then on the 30th, we're going to have Erin on. Erin made her money wholesaling. She made a ton of money just because she started talking about what she was doing. Everybody said, well, can you find me some of those? You go, I don't know. Let me go find out. So she'll tell her story. We had her in Hawaii, so you remember Erin.
We just look at ourselves. I mean, Toby and I, out of all the real estate we own, I think there's only probably 2 or 3 properties that we didn't use a bird dog for a wholesaler for, that were brought to us to acquire.
Yep.
And so it just tells you that we didn't have time because we're so busy running the law firm and speaking and doing what we do. But if we find people who have properties, and we're looking to invest, I mean, that's how we put a lot of our real estate deals together, and many times they're far under market.
Yeah, and you don't have to go find 15 cap rates or these really high cap rates. Traditional, like a good return, if you go above 7%, you're making people nervous. So a lot of times they're just looking for decent performing properties. So if you find somebody like that, as a wholesaler, you don't even have to do the flip. You just have to find someone who maybe is in the business of flipping. And now you find the end buyer, and you find the property that you're getting to flip. You might find yourself sitting there getting a nice chunk of change for every property you put together for somebody. You're meeting 2 people's objectives. You get paid twice. But walking through how it works is, let's say you find a bargain property. You're looking for things that meet your criteria, meet the criteria of the people you work with. Let's say that you look at it and you say, hey, the after repair value, and usually you're going off of comps. So you go into an area, you say, hey, here's what the properties are selling for. You see a current market value, hey, they're selling it for $150,000, and you know there's going to be repair costs of $60,000. Right out the gate, you should have a pretty good idea of what you're going to be able to buy that property for. So you say, all right, let's just see. I'm going to meet with the sellers and put the property under contract price. We already know that market value is 150, and we're going to subtract off our repair costs, which is our MAO. So we're going to put in an offer. Let's just say they go the sale price at 115,000. So you take that, you get that under contract. And let me just see if I can do the MAO off the top of my head. I think it's going to be higher than that. So it's going to be a decent sales price. I think we're going to be fine. And you show the buyer's property, so you have people that you're looking for. Let's say that you met at a RIA, somebody that was either looking for a property, or you just know people that are looking for the property, or you go out and sell it. Go out to Craigslist, whatnot. And then you get the contract to sell to the buyer, and you make the money on the spread in between. So what did you do? You get it under contract. Actually, I made a little boo-boo. You didn't buy it for the 115. That's what you're able to sell it for. So you're able to sell it to your guy. So let's just say that you have Mr. Wholesale, Mr. Flipper there, who already says, "Hey, 115 grand, I'll buy them all day." It says this is a good deal. I'm going to be able to make a good chunk of change. They'll just put the money in your pocket. So let me go back. So you put it under contract. You go out and find your buyer. Hey, Mr. Wholesaler. And so in this particular case, when we go over the types of wholesaling, you are actually um, double closing. So you're actually putting it under contract, and then you're either selling them through a wholesale trust and getting their $25,000, or you're doing a double close where you're buying it for 90, then you're reselling it immediately for 115. In either case, your profit is $25,000. You can wholesale just about anywhere. Um, Again, we look for the markets, and there's really hot markets right now that are great, possibly for flipping, because again, you have huge appreciation. That maybe not so great for buy and holds, but you're looking at the hot markets when you're looking at when you're wholesaling to flippers, and you're looking for the steady markets with low appreciation, that have always been kind of like the steady eddies where they're not really getting much notoriety. Where to find properties? This is what Denise uses. This is what a lot of folks use. HomePath, HUD Home Store, Property Radar, HubZoo, Auction.com, Home Search. Your marketing campaign, if you go out and you actually decide, hey, we buy ugly houses, that type of thing, you go out there. Realtors, pocket listings. What you're going to find that I don't put up there is the multiple listing service. You're going to find properties through your own effort. You're going to have to go out there. I would say realistically, I would go into bigger pockets, into that community. I'm just going to write it in. And go into that community. Because you'll find people that are looking, and also people that have similar mindset who are going into different markets. There's more than enough. You'll find that they're very free with the information because they want as many people going in and fixing up properties as possible in a particular area, because it drives up the market values for everybody. Which is why you tend to have really good markets. How about top markets? These are, again, shouldn't be surprising to anybody because we read about them in the news all the time. You're seeing Seattle's a hot market, obviously. San Antonio's been tremendous. Charlotte was a big one. Orlando's big. Dallas and Austin. Austin probably more than Dallas. Austin was on fire. Fort Lauderdale, Cape Coral. But those are what you look at as top markets for real estate as far as appreciation. And you look at top markets for jobs, and you're going to see ones that are a little bit different. It's interesting. And you can start looking at, hey, maybe one that's not on here, or excuse me, one that's on, maybe that there's ones here that are not listed. Actually, let's see how I could say this right. I may have marketplaces on this list that are not on this list. And what that tells me is I have a marketplace that isn't appreciating like crazy, but the job market is really good. I can see two right now. I could probably go find, let's see, Colorado. Colorado's been pretty on fire right now. We know that Denver's going through the roof. So Colorado will be on there, but before that, this was about 6 months ago. That would have been a good one. Georgia. Let's see if they're hiding on there. What that's doing, we saw Florida's on there, Oregon. These are markets probably where you're going to find decent properties for wholesaling, because the jobs market's strong. It's going to attract more people, and more people is going to bump up price. Or it's just going to stay steady Eddie, and you're going to have a good rental market. But that immediately gives us some markets to look at. Other things we look at. What if I want to wholesale, I want to put properties under contract? How can I do it? Where can I get money? Obviously, if you have money set aside in savings, and it doesn't take a lot to put a property under contract, maybe $5,000 on a decent sized property. Some of them you can get away with 500. Um, Retirement plans, can you wholesale inside of a retirement plan? Technically, you can. I wouldn't. Usually, when I'm looking at 401k, I'm thinking I can borrow it. If I have an IRA, you cannot loan monies out of an IRA to yourself, but you can roll it into your own 401k and then borrow money.
Well, how about if they have an existing 401k right now with their current employer? They could borrow up to 50,000 or 50% of their balance in their
Yep.
plan,
Yep.
and then that becomes a seed capital that you could then use to put in your offers with if you're going to
Yep.
wholesale.
So the folks that I referred to that had the 6 acres that had a manufactured home on it, um, and if I misstate those facts at all, that's pretty much the gist of it. It might be 4 acres. Uh, they also had 401k, like they were sitting on the money to where they could, like they had access to it. They were concerned about trying to get a loan against the first house, saying, "Hey, we need to get money out of it." And I said, "Well, you don't really have to. You're actually sitting on it." They had money in a retirement account that they could borrow against, and they had no idea. So sometimes it's not obvious to you that you may have access to capital. It's just making sure that you're doing something with it, so that you're able to pay. You're not paying an exorbitant amount. Most loans that have 401ks, you're looking at 4, 5, 6% tops. Credit cards. We have clients that do the old cash, what do they call it? Credit card stacking. There are companies that'll put together a group of credit cards for you and give you access to the capital on those cards for 12 months at zero interest. They usually charge fees, like Seed Capital is one of them, Universal's another. It might cost you a couple points, sometimes 3 or 4 points. So let's just say you had 100,000, you could get that money for 4%, 5%, whatever it is, but you'd pay no interest for a year. Now you have to pay those cards off. But if you were looking to do a flip or something like that, where you were going to do it in a short period of time, you could access the money technically out of your personal credit card. But again, the whole idea is to walk in with your eyes open and know your worst case scenario. I've seen people get burned on this because they didn't do and complete their rehab, or they accessed the money. And then, for example, in one case, the guy had a family emergency and for 3 or 4 months was tied up dealing with a family illness. Well, he accessed the money. He had the money. Now the time is clicking. He's not paying interest on it, so he wasn't really thinking about it. But now he has 8 months to pay it back, or he's going to get hit. And so he's like, "Oh gosh, what do I do?" I was like, "Well, why do you access the money?" "I'm flipping a house." "Okay, flip the house. Get with it. Otherwise, pay it back." Equity lines of credit. You can actually do loans against stock portfolios. It's called a security-backed line of credit. There's lines of credit against equity in a house. If you own your house, it doesn't mean that you're getting a mortgage against it. It just means that you get a line of credit that you use that is secured by that real estate. It doesn't mean you're mortgaging the house. Again, it just means that you have the money there available to you, and then as soon as you pay it back, the interest stops. So there's really not much of a cost to it. And then OPM, other people's money. Other people's money is just a fancy way of saying anybody but yours. And can you use family members? Yeah, I've seen clients do this where they get together with folks. Now, parents don't work and kids don't work, but sometimes they'll have siblings. You can actually borrow out of a sibling's IRA if they're willing to loan you the money. And so usually it's if you have a good plan in place. Sometimes you may be surprised that you have access to capital and you're giving them a higher interest rate than they would have earned someplace else. You're not a disqualified person under that circumstance. It's always knowing what the rule is, and if you have questions, of course, that's what we're here for. It's just making sure that you're not stepping on any laws, but quite often you'd be surprised at the people around you. They say, "Hey, I want to get something better than that 1% I'm getting or less than 1% I'm getting on my CD, or the money's just sitting in my account doing nothing, but I'm scared to death of putting it in the stock market. Great. Let's look and buy things where the numbers make sense to us. Or if you're just going out and wholesaling, you're tying things up for maybe a month or two. Sometimes it's just going out and saying, hey, quite often you're not even putting money up. Like I know that Erin, for example, I don't think she had to put up a ton of her own. And most of those deals, I don't think she came out of pocket at all. Types of financing, I don't really want to jump into all the traditional stuff. There is hard money gap funding, which we talked about. There's bridge financing, which is to get you tied over. It's kind of like, it's almost like gap funding. Private money. Depending on the type of deal you're going into, and again, this is gonna be dictated by who your end user. If you're wholesaling and you're finding properties for somebody, and all you're trying to do is tie it up, quite often they're the one who's providing you with the funding. So the folks that I mentioned that would go down to and buy properties at the foreclosure auctions, it was never with their own money. They actually required people put money on deposit. And in that particular case, a lot of these guys would just have cashier's checks in various denominations so that the wholesaler could literally close in their name or the name of their entity the day that they went out and bought the property. And then the wholesaler would just keep one of the checks for themselves. But I wouldn't always say, I wouldn't necessarily say that's a real good idea. Those guys are going fast and loose. I would always want to have something, kind of a check. But you could have them actually buy it and do it as a short-term loan to you. Hey guys, you guys have all this cash. Why don't you buy it? And then you just pay them a interest rate, a flat interest rate. So now you've transferred money over to them, and now you take title. Somebody just asked, what about establishing a real estate investment trust? It's a security. It's a whole different animal. You have a lot more compliance, and with compliance there's expense, and with expense there's money going to a third party, not to you, and that usually makes things not worth it. Maximum allowable offer is the calculation we did earlier. I did mention if you're wholesaling, use the 60%, but it's the after repair value, multiply it by 70%, subtract off your repairs, and that's your maximum allowable offer. You can do that with any property and get some idea of what your MAO is very quickly. So if you know the after repair value on a property is going to be $100,000, what should you pay for it? Multiply it by 70, subtract off the repairs, what you anticipate the repair cost is going to be after walking through it, and you're going to be at an MAO of $65,000. You turn that offer in immediate. You don't have to think twice about it. And can you be off with this? Yes, you can be off. There's wiggle room. But you walk through, after a while, you get a pretty good taste of what the cost of doing repairs is. If you don't know, and you're brand new, go with the rehabber. Have them teach you how to value using their methodology of what they know what their costs are. So that, because what they're really doing is training you to become their bird dog. And then once you learn how to do it, then you can do your own flip. Once you do a few flips, then you can do your own single family, your buy and holds. It's all a process, again, the three-legged stool. All right, we talked about comps a little bit earlier. What do you want to do? Usually it's within a half mile. It depends on the neighborhood. I've seen them go out a mile, 2 miles. It depends on what's been sold. If you don't have a lot of things being sold, so in some of the markets that I do business in and Clint and I have bought in, the sales are misleading because every single one of them is a rehab property, and they're being maintained as part of an inventory that's not being resold. They're being purchased to basically be put as far as a single family residence. So you want to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. So whatever it takes. You say a half mile, a mile, it really matters on the neighborhood. So you want to kind of stick with the neighborhood. Again, if you have questions, get a realtor or somebody who's in that marketplace. You want to look at things that were sold recently, say the last 90 days. You want the square footage to be close. You don't want to be looking at the average per foot of a 5,000 square foot house when you're comparing an 800 square foot house. You want it to be the same number of bedrooms and a similar layout. You do not want to do your comps based off of active listings, pending sales, because this is all subject to manipulation. You want it to be sold comps only. If you're missing comps, and I've been in a situation where you're missing comps, be wary. The only times I've ever been burned is when I screwed up on the comps and I didn't listen to my own gut, and ended up buying something that didn't have a real market, so I ended up holding something a lot longer than you anticipate, because you think, oh, there's lots of comps out there. No, it's not selling. But again, what bails you out is cash flow. So you can have a mistake. We have a couple in Vegas that we still own that we couldn't sell it for what we thought we could sell it for. We ended up holding it, and thank God we did, because it's appreciated significantly more and kicked out cash flow for many years, all with almost no expense. I can't remember the last time we put any money into one of these properties. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I'm like, the only time I see it, even think about it, is when the property manager says the lease is up again. He wants to renew. So same thing. We already talked about wholesaling. Let's walk through it one more time. Find the property. You look around. You get a flavor for the neighborhood. Hey, they're sitting there saying, hey, what is it worth? If it was all fixed up, and I should just put a caveat, what's the current market value of the property, what it is right now, then you subtract off the repair costs. The under contract price, let's just say it's 90 grand. You use these figures. So what's our after repair value? 250. How do we do our MAO? We do 70%. Which is, I don't know, what's 70% of 250,000? To get my calculator out. I should know this off the top of my head. Let me just pull my calculator. Where is my calculator? They have these great phones. Here we go, 250,000. times 0.7 is 175,000. Minus the repair cost, which is 60. So the maximum allowable offer on this property, if you were going to fix and flip it yourself, is 115,000. So that's who we're going to sell it to. So we're going to buy it for whatever we can, get it lower. If we did 60%, if we're doing this as a wholesaler, then we know we got 120 and 3, so 150,000 minus 60,000. So our maximum offer, if I'm wholesaling, is right here. And they say yes, I turn around and I sell it to my friend, the property flipper, for 115. And again, there's different ways to do these. I don't have to take title. I could put it in a trust and sell them the beneficial right at 25 grand. Not everybody's comfortable doing that. Sometimes it's a double close. Sometimes it really depends on your relationship with whoever you're selling it to. If it's a close one, chances are you're gonna trim that down a little bit, or you're gonna take a piece out of profit. But you're signing the contract, you're actively marketing it to buyers, you locate a buyer, then you close with the buyer. Reverse wholesaling is you locate the active cash buyers, you determine what the cash buyers want, and you're basically selling the property to the cash buyer, or you're taking a finder's fee. In either case, again, there's wholesalers that do well in both ways. One, you know who you're selling it to ahead of time, you're finding out what they want. The other one, you're just going out and marketing it to people that may want to buy properties. The reverse process, it's like we were talking about a little bit earlier. Um, Usually when you're looking for cash buyers and you want to find cash buyers, one of the ways you can find cash buyers is you go into your county records and you look for cash sales in the last 30, 60 days and see if they've purchased two properties, if there's two cash sales to the same buyer, and they should have access. Like most counties, you can either get the data directly and you can look for cash sales, or you contact them and they'll have a way to download a report. You're just looking for somebody who has bought more than one property in the last 90 days for cash. And chances are you're dealing with a cash investor. Look them up and say, what are you looking for? Other thing you can do is look for motivated sellers, people that have properties that don't look so hot. You know, maybe I have one client up in Seattle whose whole business model was buying apartment complexes that were older apartment complexes that looked a little bit run down, going into to the people that owned it and realizing that the same type of person generally owned it. They weren't not fixing it up because they didn't want to fix it up, is that they weren't sitting on a bunch of cash. It was basically paying for itself, and they had no motivation to go dump a bunch of money into it. So she said, hey, I can tune this thing up, I can get higher rents, I can still pay you what you're used to making, and I can take over the property and own it. And that's what she would do. She'd go in and she'd find these properties that needed to be fixed up, and they would get greater rents, and she would do them in transitions. And what was interesting is she never put her own money in. She was able to do this all through the seller financing. Understanding your market, the things that you're going to want to look at, and again, if you're not experienced in real estate, just talk to a realtor. You're looking at the number of properties on the market and the average days they go on market and the median sales price. You don't want to buy way above it. If you can get down below, so like in Vegas, I can tell you if you're underneath 200,000, you're hot. It's tough to find it. If you get underneath 100, now you got to be real careful because you might be looking at some sketchy, but there's a sweet spot. In all towns, there's a sweet spot. Your marketing plan. If you're going to be a wholesaler and you want to be serious about it, then you need to have the whole fake it till you make it going for you. So you want to have a business name. You don't want to have it going directly to your cell phone. You want to get like a Grasshopper or Phone.com or Ring Central. Get a phone that has, even if it's an automated attendant, that says you've reached ABC Properties. To reach our sales department, please press 1. If you're a investor looking to acquire properties, press 2. If you're for accounting, press 3. It can all go to your cell phone, but it looks a lot more professional. Make sure that you're operating through an entity, so if you do have a misstep, that you're protected. Make sure that you have things like business cards, websites. Someone's going to look you up. If you go to a real estate investors association, start asking somebody, you don't want to look like you're just brand new. You just say, hey, look, I'm looking for someone who's acquiring, I'm looking for a cash investor, someone who's looking to acquire properties, and I go out and find them for them. Facebook page, that's helpful. If you put it, you can attach it to your, you want to have a business profile. You don't want to have all your crazy partying or a bunch of kid pictures in your personal Facebook page, kind of as your business. Where it's, obviously it's kind of a side. Just make sure that it has its own appearance. Even if it's just 2 or 3 pictures, it's better than having nothing. It's better than having, the other side too, having 500 kid pictures too. Not against kid pictures, it's just most people, they're not going to take it super serious. Seller and buyer credibility package, that's just having some idea, some documentation of what you will do. And even if you use the phrases that we just used tonight, here's how I'm valuing these. Just make sure that you have something that shows the formula that you're using. And so if it's, if I'm an investor and I'm looking at you as a wholesaler, all I want to know is that you're doing some of your homework, and that you're not just bringing me every deal that you can find, that you've done none of the vetting out. You can, even if you just put a single document together that says this is how I um, filter properties for you. And then private money credibility package, you don't need to worry about that if you're wholesaling, only if you're flipping, but that just means you have somebody that you work with that says, hey, I'll get you money that meets this criteria. And so you walk up to somebody and says, hey, I have financing for this much. This is the maximum amount I can get. And then they know that you're being straight. Uh, let's see, somebody's asking about the slide deck. I can always get you the slide deck. There's a lot on here. Where to find your cash buyers? I already mentioned the county website. Google is a good place if you're looking for investment groups. There was one individual who I was talking to, and they said, I don't know how to find anything. So I just typed in their city and in real estate investment club or real estate investment group, and I think we found 6 or 7, right? That were meeting that following week. Some of them are small. Some of them are, really it's just people getting together to market to each other. Just be wary of those. You'll know pretty quickly when you get in, and if you have questions, then there's like the biggerpockets.com. I'd probably push you there because that's a very legitimate group. I don't think, Clint, you've worked with Bigger Pockets for a long time. Do they allow marketing or anything like that, or is it pretty much just the real estate investors?
I don't recall if they allow it or not. I mean, it's just mainly real estate investors. You might have to work through Josh if you want to market on there.
I'm just trying to point them into places where they might meet real estate investors that aren't trying to sell them something. So if they're looking for people that want to, like if they're going to wholesale, it's like like for example, if Clint and I were looking to buy properties, I would just tell you our criteria and what we would want to know. And then if you brought something, if it was crud, if I had to do too much, don't expect me to respond too much. If if it piques the interest, then usually there's going to be questions that are asked and you're just going to do the legwork. If you already have done all the legwork, like, hey, we've done 10 of these in this area, I've already sold 6 of these to other people that flip, I have 4 right now under contract I could sell, that's a much better position to be in. But if you say, hey, I'm just, I've never done this before, I'm looking for properties to find, do your homework first. Nobody really wants to be kind of a guinea pig, and they will give you what homework to do. So if there's an investor, they'll say, this is the type of deal I buy. Or this top one, again, I can't even stress this enough. If you just go to a county website and you can find out who's been buying the properties, look at the properties they've purchased. Reverse engineer it. What did they buy it for? You'll be able to figure out pretty quickly what type of properties they buy. And this is stuff that you can do in a matter of minutes. If I can get the right data, I can usually ferret it out pretty quickly. And you can look for cash buyers that are buying things for less than, whatever it is, the wheelhouse that marketplace looks at it. You want it to be below the mean, you want it to comp well, and you want it to cash flow. So you're going to have very few markets that are going to end up hitting all those things. And so if you talk to groups, if you talk to local RIAs, if you get online, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly in a particular area whether that's something that somebody is interested in. And if you don't know, you can always just ask the group. I know that Bigger Pockets, there's people that will respond to you. All right, so that is it for tonight. 3 hours sneaks by very quickly when you're talking about real estate. We have another event on Monday the 16th. I'm trying to think of who I have as guests that are going to be on that one. I'm trying to bring in some folks that deal in different industries. I'll probably shoot something out prior that goes over the kind of the agenda. We're going to be focusing on that one on more on flips and how you kind of do your valuation, kind of the soup to nuts, how to buy and sell a property, buying it with the intent to sell it, and how you do it quickly, tricks of the trade. And again, I try to bring in people that actually do it. And the secret in real estate is always going to be know your exit before you enter. It's always knowing your market. So even if you get caught with a deal and something changes in your life, like you're going to flip a house, you buy it, and then something bad happens, the unexpected, that keeps you from being able to be personally able to do it, the numbers should still work. You should never buy a property where you're getting hammered, or hopefully you're buying these properties good enough and you're using your MAO and you've got some room there to where you could actually do traditional financing. You could hire someone to fix it up and still keep it as a single family residence. It might be the best. Again, mistakes get erased over time when you're doing buying homes. So sometimes something that looks bad, I missed out on making the $20,000 on the flip, might end up being good. Hey, I have a piece of property that's kicking me $300 positive income, and I've now held it for 15 years. Third webinar, I switched it 1 week just because we have the First Steps to Success down in Florida that Monday. I don't want to be competing with Danny, and I don't want to have folks that are down there. I know a couple of you guys said, hey, can we meet? Can Canadians do wholesaling? I see a few things. Yes. Does wholesaling take a big marketing budget? No. You can actually do it with next to nothing. The people that have made the most money, there's a Bigger Pockets Marketplace. There we go. Gosh, there's some pretty cool stuff. I was going to say the people that made the most money, I don't think they put any money into it. The ones that did the best in the wholesaling. And I can think of two off the top of my head that did really, really well. Clint, is there anything else you want to jump in?
No, I think you covered it, Toby.
All right. So thanks for joining us. Hey, Clint, thanks for stepping in. Thanks. At the last minute, I didn't want to make Denise do something. She was feeling pretty heinous, and Clint was kind enough to step in and make sure that there was a second on the call. Really appreciate that. And it's his first, thanks, Clint. There's a lot of folks there. Again, Clint is one of the few guys that I've run across in the professional industry as far as attorneys that actually does this. I can think of 2 or 3 in the country that I've ever met that are attorneys or accountants that actually buy and sell real estate, and I've been lucky enough to work with him. So always feel free to ask us any questions. If you're a Platinum member, you're part of our community, feel free to book time with any of our advisors, run stuff by us. Been doing this a long time, and we enjoy the process. We want you guys to be successful because it makes you much better clients, if you know what I mean. We want you guys to be insanely successful so that you can refer your friends and keep using us to do all your tax and asset protection and all your estate planning. All right, so until next week, Monday the 16th at 5 p.m., I'll bid you farewell. And then we'll keep on learning how to do real estate and how to build your dynasty with real estate. So thanks again.